Welcome to my channel, where every story comes to life. Dive into captivating narratives that spark your imagination. Let's start today's new narrative story. Ryan Carter. 35 years old, a dedicated financial analyst. He's calm, reliable, and always puts his family first. He believes in hard work, commitment, and love. Little does he know, his world is about to be shattered. Mia Carter. 32 years old. Ryan's wife. She's attractive, charismatic, and a successful marketing executive. Lately, she's become distant, often claiming work stress as the cause. What Ryan doesn't realize is that Mia is leading a double life. Jake Morris. 36 years old. Ryan's best friend since childhood. He's blunt, loyal, and always tells it like it is. When Jake sees Mia with another man, he faces the difficult task of breaking the news to his best friend. Ethan Brooks. 40 years old. A wealthy businessman and Mia's lover. He's older, charming, and offers Mia the thrill and excitement she feels is missing in her marriage. But appearances can be deceiving. Ryan Carter had always prided himself on building a life he could be proud of. With a thriving career in finance, a beautiful home in the suburbs, and a wife who was as stunning as she was ambitious, he thought he had it all. The couple had met years ago at a corporate event, and it didn't take long for them to fall in love. Mia had been everything he wanted, smart, independent, driven, and their love had been a whirlwind that quickly led to marriage. For years, Ryan believed they were happy. Sure, things had gotten a little rocky lately. Mia had been working late more often, and there had been less laughter between them, but Ryan chalked it up to the pressures of their respective jobs. They both had demanding careers, and Mia had been taking on more responsibility at her marketing firm. At least, that's what he told himself. It was a Friday evening, and Ryan was excited to unwind with his best friend, Jake Morris. They had a standing tradition of meeting at Giovanni's, an upscale Italian restaurant, every month to catch up over drinks. For Ryan, these dinners had become a sanctuary, an escape from the growing distance between him and Mia. The conversation flowed easily, as always, as they shared stories about work, mutual friends, and their favorite sports teams. Jake was just about to make a joke when his face went pale. His eyes locked on something, or someone, behind Ryan. Ryan? Jake's voice dropped. Don't freak out, man, but I think you need to see this. Ryan frowned, confused by the sudden tension in Jake's voice. What are you talking about? Jake didn't respond. Instead, he subtly nodded toward the back of the restaurant. Slowly, Ryan turned in his seat, his heart rate picking up as he tried to make sense of Jake's strange behavior. And then he saw her. There, in a secluded booth by the window, was Mia. She was dressed in a sleek, black dress, one Ryan had never seen before, her long hair cascading over her shoulders as she laughed at something the man sitting across from her said. Ryan's mind raced. Maybe it was a business meeting, he thought. Maybe this was one of her clients. But deep down, he knew better. The way she leaned into the man, the way she touched his hand across the table, it wasn't professional. It was intimate. His stomach churned as the reality of the situation sank in. That guy, he's not just some friend, is he? Jake asked cautiously. Ryan felt his throat tighten. No, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Ryan didn't remember much about the rest of the dinner. Jake tried to steer the conversation away from what they had just witnessed, but Ryan's mind was already somewhere else, spinning, reeling from the betrayal he had just seen. The dinner felt like a bad dream. His hands shook as he gripped his phone, staring at Mia's number, debating whether to confront her right then and there. When he finally got home that night, Mia was already in bed. She was pretending to sleep. Ryan could tell. He watched her for a moment, his heart pounding, before deciding he wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. He needed to think, to figure out what this meant for their marriage. But the next morning, Mia's phone buzzed. Ryan, still grappling with what he had seen, couldn't resist. He glanced at the screen and saw a message from someone named Ethan. "Last night was incredible. Can't wait to see you again. XOXO." Ryan's blood ran cold. Any doubts he had vanished in an instant. This wasn't a business meeting. Mia was having an affair, and she wasn't even bothering to hide it anymore. Ryan waited until Mia returned from the shower before he confronted her. He sat at the kitchen table, holding her phone in his hand. The minute she saw it, she knew the jig was up. "Who's Ethan?" Ryan asked, his voice low but laced with hurt. Mia's face drained of color. She stammered for a moment, trying to come up with an excuse, but Ryan wasn't interested in hearing lies. He slammed the phone on the table, the screen lighting up again with another message from Ethan. "Don't even bother lying," Ryan said, his voice cracking. "I saw you with him last night." Mia's eyes filled with tears as she sank into the chair across from him. "I'm sorry, Ryan," she whispered. "It's not what you think." But it was exactly what Ryan thought. As Mia started to unravel, she confessed to everything. She had been seeing Ethan for months. He was an older man she had met through a business connection, and what started as innocent flirting had quickly spiraled into an affair. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," Mia sobbed. I didn't feel the connection between us anymore. We've been growing apart, and So, this is my fault?" Ryan spat, his hands clenched into fists. "You cheat on me because what? We've been having a rough patch?" Mia's tears fell harder. "I'm not trying to blame you. I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know what I want." Ryan stood up, pacing the kitchen, his mind in turmoil. His wife, the woman he had trusted with his heart, had betrayed him. Everything he thought he knew about their marriage was crumbling around him, and all Mia could do was sit there and cry, unable to offer any real explanation. But Ryan wasn't done. He wanted answers, and he wasn't going to stop until he had them. Days turned into weeks, and Ryan's pain didn't subside. In fact, it only deepened as Mia's betrayal weighed on him. They agreed to separate temporarily, giving each other space to figure out what they wanted. But Ryan's feelings of anger and humiliation consumed him, and he found himself obsessing over one question. How could Mia do this to him? One night, after a few drinks with Jake, Ryan admitted he wanted revenge. "You want to make her regret it?" Jake asked, leaning in. "Then you've got to show her that you don't need her. You've got to make her realize she threw away the best thing in her life." That's when it hit Ryan. The best revenge wasn't getting even. It was rising above. Mia expected him to wallow in his pain, to beg for her forgiveness. But he wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. Instead, Ryan focused on himself. He started working out, shedding the weight he had gained over the years, and threw himself into his career, taking on more projects and responsibilities. He began going out more, meeting new people, and reconnecting with old friends. Mia, still caught up in her relationship with Ethan, didn't notice at first. But slowly, as time passed, she began to see the changes in Ryan. He looked better, more confident. His career was thriving while Ethan's, unknown to Mia, was beginning to unravel. It turned out Ethan wasn't the man Mia thought he was. He had financial troubles that he had been hiding, and Ryan, being the sharp financial analyst he was, discovered the cracks in Ethan's business. Through a mutual connection, Ryan made sure Mia found out. It wasn't long before the cracks in Mia's affair began to show. Ethan wasn't as secure or as wealthy as he had appeared. The thrill that had once drawn Mia in began to fade as she realized the life she had left Ryan for was built on lies. Meanwhile, Ryan's life was on an upward trajectory. He had moved on emotionally, physically, and financially, and Mia, now watching the life she had chosen unravel, felt the weight of her choices. Months later, Mia showed up at Ryan's doorstep. She looked different, older, tired. Gone was the confident woman who had left him for another man. Now, She was the one seeking forgiveness. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice small. "I don't know what I was thinking. Ryan, I miss you. I miss us." Ryan looked at her, and for the first time in months he didn't feel anger or betrayal. He felt nothing. The pain she had caused was still there, but it no longer defined him. He had moved on. "I loved you, Mia," Ryan said softly. "But we're not the same people anymore. You made your choice, and I've made mine." With that, Ryan closed the door. There was no yelling, no dramatic goodbye. Just the quiet realization that sometimes the best revenge is finding peace within yourself and letting go of the past. And that, my friends, is how Ryan turned his heartbreak into strength. Revenge isn't always about getting back at someone. It's about rising above the pain and finding your own path to happiness. What would you have done in Ryan's shoes? Would you have given Mia a second chance? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and of course, don't forget to subscribe for more emotional and powerful stories like this one. Have a similar experience or want to ask a question? Drop it in the comments below. Until next time, stay strong and keep moving forward.
David and Colleen, the golden couple everyone admired, had met at a raucous college party, their eyes locking across a room pulsing with music and laughter. That night, they had fallen hard and fast, the kind of love that poets wax lyrical about. Over the years, their bond became a fortress, unshaken by life's battering storms. But even the mightiest fortresses can crumble. Their spark, once a roaring blaze, had dimmed to a flicker. The daily grind, work pressures, and the numbing monotony of routine gnawed at the foundations of their marriage. Colleen, restless and seeking the thrill that once came so effortlessly, found herself captivated by the flirtations of a younger man. A dangerous game, but one she couldn't resist playing. David sat in the living room, lost in memories. He remembered their early days, laughter that echoed like music, dreams that soared high. Now, those memories felt like they belonged to another life. He watched Colleen, dressed to kill, getting ready for another night out. She looked stunning, a stark contrast to their increasingly casual and distant interactions at home. "Don't give me that look, David," Colleen said, slipping on her heels. "Women in their 40s often seek younger companionship." David, leaning back and swirling his drink, responded with a cold smile. "And often end up divorced." Colleen's eyes flashed with a mixture of anger and arrogance. "You won't divorce me," she said with unnerving certainty. "You love me, and I love you. This is just a diversion. You wouldn't throw away our commitment over something so small." David's laugh was sharp, cutting through the tension. "Oh, how modern of you," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're right, it's practically a trend. Even Joan Bennett, Mrs. Picture Perfect herself, has a lover. Isn't it just darling how everyone pretends their marriages are fine while screwing around behind closed doors?" Colleen's expression hardened, but she said nothing. The silence between them was heavy, fraught with the unspoken words that hung in the air. David took a long sip of his drink, eyes never leaving hers. "Go on then, Colleen. Enjoy your night out. Just remember, every diversion has its price." When the doorbell rang, Colleen shot a glance at David. "Can you get that?" she asked, though she knew the answer already. David didn't even look up from his newspaper. "Nope," he replied flatly, as if she'd just asked him to walk across hot coals. "I'm not welcoming your boyfriend." With a sigh, Colleen opened the door to Ryan, her 32-year-old date, waiting patiently on the porch. "Sorry about that," she said, gesturing towards the living room where David remained entrenched. "He's having a hard time with this whole thing." Ryan gave her a reassuring smile, the kind that seemed to say, "No worries. I've seen worse." He was calm, understanding. It was part of what drew her to him. Back inside, Colleen tried to calm the storm brewing in David. "Ryan's not my boyfriend," she said, planting herself firmly in front of him. "Yet. And let's not forget, we've been together 20 years. I've been loyal, supportive. I deserve a little freedom." David glared at her, feeling the sting of disrespect. "Yeah, freedom to do what?" Date some guy you met at Starbucks? Colleen nodded, unabashed. She met Ryan at the Starbucks in her office building, where his flirty banter made her feel young and alive. All her friends were having affairs with younger men, so why not her? Tonight was just another step in that direction. Ryan pulled up in a sleek, late-model Mercedes, the kind that screamed, "I've made it." At the restaurant, he tipped the valet like it was pocket change and ushered Colleen inside with an air of easy confidence. "I'm delighted you agreed to go out with me, Colleen. You're an incredibly beautiful woman." She smiled, appreciating the compliment but feeling the need to set boundaries. "Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate your attention, but I love my husband. I'm not leaving him." Ryan nodded, unperturbed. "All I wanted was an evening out with a beautiful, intelligent woman, and here we are." The evening flowed smoothly, their earlier coffee chats having laid the groundwork. After a delightful dinner, they hit a jazz club, swaying to the music. Ryan grew bolder, his hand resting on her thigh. She didn't mind. In fact, it was thrilling. Around midnight, they finally left the club. In the car, they kissed, a passionate, heated exchange that left Colleen breathless. But she pulled back. "I should get home." "When can I see you again?" Ryan asked, eyes glinting with anticipation. "I can't meet you every day. Maybe Sunday? Do you like the ballet? My cousin can get us good tickets." "I've never been, but I'd love to go. David isn't into artsy stuff. I'll meet you instead of picking you up at home." "What time?" "It's a matinee. Let's meet for lunch at 11 a.m. They settled the details and drove back to Colleen's house. She kissed Ryan goodbye, steeling herself for whatever awaited inside. To her surprise, David was already in bed, asleep. In the bathroom, she wiped away her makeup, pondering whether to wake him. She feared a silent, cold morning if she didn't. "David," she called softly. He stirred, barely awake. "What? Do you want to talk?" "No, I want to sleep." "Okay, I'll get ready for bed." He started to rise, but she stopped him. "Actually, I have a question." She stepped out in her nightgown, a deliberate choice to show she was still his. "Okay," he said, his voice laced with suspicion. "Did you have sex with him?" David asked bluntly. "No, David. It was just a date. I've never had sex on a first date, you know that." David nodded, but his skepticism remained. "Yeah, but now you're just looking for a Zex buddy, not a husband. I thought maybe things had changed. Are you seeing him again?" "We're going to the ballet on Sunday and having lunch," David scoffed. "So this isn't supposed to affect us, but you're seeing him Friday night and Sunday afternoon, our usual time together." "Interesting." Colleen sighed, realizing he wasn't listening anymore. He lay down, turning his back to her. She finished getting ready for bed, hoping against hope that David would come to terms with their new reality. The next morning, Colleen wasn't surprised David was gone. She expected an adjustment period. She hoped he'd be back soon as she planned to spend Sunday with him. But as the day progressed, she realized he was avoiding her. Knowing he often worked Saturdays, she decided to check his office. She wasn't surprised to find his car there. After signing in at the security desk, she took the elevator to the 7th floor and went to David's office, as she had many times before. "Hello, David," she greeted. "Colleen, Oscar told me you were coming up." "What do you want?" David asked. "To spend time with my husband," she replied. "Really? Boyfriend busy today?" David shot back. "Stop being childish, David. You've never been the only person in my life. I see my friends every day," Colleen argued. "Unless you're having sex with them, it's not the same," David countered. "I'm sorry this is hard for you. I've tried to assure you that my actions won't affect our marriage or my feelings for you. I love you and want a long life together," she pleaded. "Then why are you doing this, Colleen? Is hurting me how you show love?" "You're being incredibly selfish," David accused. "I could say the same. My relationship with him is no more significant to our marriage than my friendships." "I don't understand your objection," she stated. "You can't even say his name. Keeping him anonymous doesn't make it less harmful," David pointed out. "You know, I don't recall the last time I went on a date with a friend, but I did with him last night and will again tomorrow. He seems more important," David continued. "As I said last night, these are the only times I can get to know him. I've never just jumped into bed with someone, even in college," Colleen explained. "Until you get to the screwing stage," David interjected. "Yes, I'll be discreet so you don't know when it happens, and I'll keep it separate from our time together," she assured him. "Great, at least you'll be discreet," David replied sarcastically. "Anything else?" Colleen winced but didn't protest, hoping to avoid further conflict. "I wanted to spend the day together," she added. "As I told you last week, the quarterly reports are due. I'm always here all day Saturday before compiling data." I expected us to spend Friday evening and Sunday together, but I guess I'm not a priority, David said bitterly. Oh, David, I'm sorry. With everything going on, I forgot, Colleen apologized. Whatever. I have work to do, he dismissed her. It matters to me, Colleen insisted. Okay then, how about we go to the coast tonight after I finish? We can have dinner at Devereaux's and spend the day tomorrow, David suggested. Well, the ballet tickets are paid for. I'd feel bad canceling now, Colleen hesitated. That's okay, Colleen. I didn't expect you to say yes. You can leave now. David had stopped listening. She sighed and left, hoping it would go better. She thought he'd eventually be glad she was happy and accept her assurances. Her plan was to spend a few dates getting to know Ryan better before having sex, intending to meet him only when David was unavailable. She didn't want this to interfere with her marriage, but she wanted this. David didn't come home until nearly midnight, as was usual before quarterly reports. Colleen realized he knew she'd choose Ryan over a last-minute plan. She hoped David might be feeling amorous tonight. He often enjoyed low-key closeness after long days, and sometimes they'd end up making love. She loved him and wanted to make him happy. She waited for him, undressed under the comforter, her bare shoulders visible. "How was work, honey?" she asked as he entered the bedroom. "Same as usual. I got all the data compiled and sorted, so next week's reporting should go smoothly," David replied. He began undressing in the bedroom but went into the bathroom to strip down. When he emerged in shorts, Colleen lowered the comforter to reveal herself. "Darling, I thought we could reconnect tonight," she suggested. "Are you sure your boyfriend wouldn't mind?" David retorted. "David, comments like that aren't helpful. Can't we just enjoy ourselves tonight as husband and wife?" Colleen pleaded. David was conflicted. Despite her actions, he still loved her and was aroused by her. He believed she hadn't slept with Ryan yet, but assumed they had made out. He hoped to win her back before she went through with it, knowing he wouldn't touch her if she did. He dropped his shorts, and Colleen smiled. They spent the next 2 hours reconnecting, hoping to satisfy each other's needs. David hoped she'd abandon her plans for Ryan, while Colleen hoped to show she could fulfill David's needs while seeking satisfaction elsewhere. The next morning, David tried to keep her in bed, expressing his love. As time passed, he sensed her unease. At 10 o'clock, Colleen got up. "I'm sorry, David. I have to get ready." She chose Ryan over him again. "Sure." David put on his shorts, feeling particularly offended by being undressed in front of her as she prepared to meet her lover. He left the room without another look. Colleen felt sorrow watching him leave. She enjoyed their time together, but reluctantly got ready to meet Ryan. She showered, not wanting to meet Ryan with the scent of David on her. She dressed in a modest but alluring outfit and called for David to say goodbye, but there was no answer. Seeing their Mustang gone, she realized he had left. She sighed and drove to meet Ryan, not noticing the sedan following her. Ryan was waiting and assured her it was no problem she was a bit late. They were seated quickly, and she forgot about David in Ryan's presence. The lunch conversation flowed, and she enjoyed herself. The food was excellent, and she briefly thought of suggesting David dine there with her sometime. The ballet was beautiful, and Ryan's knowledge impressed her. He explained the story and meanings behind certain movements, making her aware of the experiences she hadn't had with David. It wasn't a criticism, just an observation of their differences and how they complemented each other. She hoped to get David on board, thinking Ryan could be more than just a fling. After the ballet, they drove to a local hill country overlook with a magnificent view of the city skyline. Colleen knew she wasn't the first woman Ryan had brought here, but didn't mind. "You're such a beautiful woman, Colleen. I feel lucky you're here with me," he said. "Then I guess we're both lucky, Ryan," Colleen said, as they started making out intensely. She felt dizzy with desire for him and wondered if she could wait until the 5th date. Reluctantly, she pulled away and Ryan was visibly disappointed. "I'm sorry, Ryan, I want to, but I have boundaries," she explained. "I know, Colleen," Ryan replied. "I get that you want to be comfortable before going further, but all our coffee dates should count for something. You're right, we did get to know each other well before our first official date. Maybe I'm being too rigid," she conceded. "When can you do a long lunch?" "Not Monday, but Tuesday works. I need time to clean up before going home, so plan accordingly," Ryan said. "I'll bring what's needed. I'll give you details tomorrow morning at Starbucks," Colleen agreed. Ryan drove her back to the restaurant where her car was parked. She got home around 6:30 p.m., feeling elated. She checked her phone for a message from David, but found none. Quickly changing into loungewear, she started dinner when she heard the garage door. "Hi, honey. Have a good drive?" she asked as David entered. "It was fine," he replied curtly. She tried to kiss him, but he turned his cheek, still upset about her leaving his bed for Ryan. At least he was talking to her, though briefly. She hoped last night's lovemaking would help, but it seemed leaving him this morning had erased the goodwill. He didn't ask about her day. "Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes, Colleen informed him. "That's fine. I'll be in the office," David said. Colleen quickly made teriyaki stir-fry with rice and called David to dinner. He washed up and joined her. She tried to make conversation. "Where'd you drive today?" she asked. "Nowhere in particular. I just drove on the highway," he replied. "Did you stop anywhere?" she continued. "I had lunch at a small deli off the freeway and stretched my legs a few times. That's it," David said. Colleen tried talking about her day. "The ballet." "I have no interest in your date, Colleen," David interrupted. "This isn't about that. I was just..." Not another word about it. "I just wanted..." David got up, leaving his meal half-eaten, and went to his office. Colleen sat for a few minutes, then cleared the table and packaged the leftovers for David's lunch. She spent the evening straightening the house, hoping David would come out of his office. She wanted to salvage the evening and share the beauty of the ballet, hoping it might interest him in the future, separate from Ryan. Later, she prepared for bed and started reading, still hoping David would join her. Near midnight, she guessed he was waiting for her to fall asleep first. She went to his office. "Are you coming to bed?" she asked. "Eventually. I have things to finish," he replied. "Please, David, come to bed. Lay beside me, make love, cuddle, or just lay quietly. Please don't avoid me," Colleen pleaded. "I told you, Colleen, I have things to finish. If you think that's avoidance, I can't help it. The sooner I finish, the sooner I can come to bed." "So, excuse me," David said. Colleen reluctantly left and returned to bed, no longer interested in reading. She wondered if she was feeling guilty and interpreting his actions through that lens, but dismissed the idea. She believed she was doing nothing wrong and still loved David. She thought he was avoiding her on purpose. Not wanting to make things worse, she turned off the light and closed her eyes, quickly falling asleep. She woke up alone the next morning, finding that David had already left for work. Unsure if he had ever come to bed, she felt increasingly frustrated with his attitude. She had reassured him that nothing would change in their marriage, but he remained intent on feeling hurt. Deciding not to beg him anymore, she planned to continue with Ryan while being a loving wife to David. She dressed and headed to Starbucks as usual to meet her friends. Spotting Ryan in the corner, she joined him after getting her coffee. "I couldn't stop thinking about you last night, Colleen," Ryan said. "Same here, Ryan. I'm looking forward to tomorrow," she replied. He handed her a note. "Here's the info for tomorrow. My condo offers more privacy than a hotel," Ryan said. "Thank you for being discreet, Ryan. I don't want to hurt my husband more than he already is," Colleen said. "Of course." They chatted a bit before Ryan left for work. Colleen then met with Joan, Marge, Ellen, and Gail. Although she knew her friends had lovers, she hadn't shared her plans, fearing it might hurt David if it became public. That night, David greeted her warmly, and they had a pleasant dinner, avoiding the topic of Ryan. Colleen felt hopeful that David was starting to understand her relationship with Ryan wouldn't affect their marriage. She didn't realize he was trying to dissuade her from pursuing a lover. The next day, Colleen arrived at Ryan's condo with anticipation. As soon as she stepped inside, Ryan pulled her close, and they quickly became physically engaged. Within minutes, they were making love, and Colleen experienced an intense pleasure she hadn't felt in years. Afterward, they relaxed in each other's arms. "That was amazing, Ryan," Colleen said, breathless. "Better than your husband?" Ryan asked, a hint of curiosity in his voice. Colleen sat up and looked him in the eye. "My husband is off limits. He's a wonderful lover. If you turn this into a contest, I'm leaving, and it will never happen again. Clear?" "Of course. I meant no harm, just concerned about your satisfaction," Ryan replied quickly. She settled back into his arms. "It was very good. I enjoy being with you and look forward to more." They spent the next 2 hours in a more affectionate manner. Colleen appreciated Ryan's responsiveness and enjoyed their time together. Ryan found her to be a perfect fit for a long-term, mutually beneficial relationship with no intention of marriage. After nearly 3 hours, Colleen showered, using her own soap and shampoo, leaving them at Ryan's condo for future visits. With a final deep kiss, they said goodbye, and she drove home while Ryan returned to work. Colleen calmed herself as she waited for David. She checked herself in the mirror repeatedly to ensure everything was in place. If David didn't know about her meetings with Ryan, it would help smooth things over. When David walked in at 7:13 p.m., Colleen greeted him warmly with a hug and kiss. Initially, he responded, but then his arms dropped and she felt his body slump. Concern filled her face as she pulled away. "You had sex with him today, didn't you?" David accused. "What? David, why do you say that?" Colleen asked, trying to remain calm. "You're a creature of habit, Colleen, and I know those habits. A midday shower was common when we were younger and active, but not in recent years. Until today." "I haven't," Colleen started to protest. "The smell of your soap and shampoo is strong. The only reason is that you showered recently, likely to wash off being with him. I appreciate you not smelling like the other man, but it gave you away." He pushed past her and went into the office. "Damn it," Colleen muttered to herself. She thought her plan had worked and hadn't considered the strong scent. She realized she needed to rethink her approach. Sighing, she started dinner, making broiled chicken breast with carrots and linguine. She set the table and went to the office. "David, dinner's ready," she called. "I'm not hungry," he replied curtly. "You need to eat," she insisted. "I'll get something later. I don't want anything you cooked," David said. Suddenly not hungry either, Colleen packed up the food as leftovers. She hated wasting food, even though they were wealthy. She spent the evening trying to figure out how to see Ryan without David knowing. She never considered not seeing Ryan at all. She went to bed alone, falling asleep quickly, thanks to her satisfaction from being with Ryan. She woke at 4 a.m. to find David asleep at his desk. She shook him awake. "David, you can't sleep like this. Come to bed or go to the spare room. This is bad for your back. I know you're angry, but I still love you and want to take care of you. Please." David, disoriented, allowed her to lead him to their bedroom. As she began undressing him, he remembered the events and resisted. "Stop, Colleen." "David, I'm just trying to get you ready for bed. Please, just a few more buttons," she pleaded. "Get your filthy hands off me," David said sharply. Colleen shrank away. David rarely raised his voice in their 25 years together. She sat at her vanity, trying to hold back tears. "I'm sorry I raised my voice, Colleen, but you wouldn't stop. I just didn't want you touching me with hands that had been on another man's body," David said, his voice softer but still firm. "David, I've showered and washed my hands, but I understand it's more in your mind. I'm sorry. I'll leave you to it." Colleen busied herself elsewhere, believing David would eventually come to terms with her affair. She never considered ending her relationship with Ryan. She saw it as a test of her resolve. After a while, she checked on David, who was asleep. She returned to bed and slept well. The next day, David worked late, informing her via text. She realized she couldn't do more to help him through this and knew what she needed to say next time they spoke. Thursday morning, Colleen was buzzing with anticipation to meet Ryan. They had discussed meeting schedules at Starbucks the previous morning. Mondays were out due to Ryan's busy schedule, and Colleen avoided Fridays and weekends to not infringe on her time with David. They settled on Tuesdays and Thursdays at Ryan's condo. The meeting with her friends felt endless, and when it finally ended, she hurried out, making sure to obey the speed limit. She arrived at Ryan's unlocked condo, where he was waiting on the bed. They skipped foreplay and had another intense 3-hour session. Ryan's flexible schedule allowed them this time. Though she would never admit it, she found Ryan to be a better lover than David due to his experience with many women. Afterwards, Colleen checked her phone and, finding no messages, assumed David would be home at the usual time. She drove home, showered thoroughly, aware this would tip David off, but she had a plan. She dressed in her loungewear and waited for David, who arrived just before 7 p.m. "Good evening, honey. Will you be eating my cooking tonight?" she asked. "I'm fine. I grabbed something on the way home," David replied. "You know fast food is bad for you," she admonished. "Yeah, well, I'll be in the office," he said dismissively. "David, I'd like to talk to you when you have a few minutes," she requested. "Okay," he agreed and went to his office, closing the door behind him. Colleen worked on the fundraiser, but realized David wasn't going to start the conversation. She went to the office and knocked. "David, can we talk now?" she asked. "I suppose," he sighed. Colleen sat down across from him. "Honey, I love you very much. I don't consider my new relationship to affect our marriage, but I understand you do. This is something I need and want. I hoped you'd be more understanding, but I'll be patient. I'll be here every evening and weekend, hoping we can move past this. If you ignore me, I'll accept that, but still be here," she explained. "So you plan to keep seeing Ryan?" he asked. "Yes, wait," she started. "Did you think I wouldn't find out his name?" David interrupted. "I thought you'd prefer not to know. Also, I apologize for the shower incident on Tuesday. I'll start showering every weekday afternoon to avoid tipping you off. I won't be meeting him that often, but it will keep things consistent, she said. And this is your final decision? Nothing I can do will change your mind, he asked, his voice tight. I'm sorry, David, but no, she confirmed. Well, I appreciate your honesty, even if it's not what I wanted to hear. Is that all? He asked, clearly pained. I love you, David. I hope you can separate my love for you from my physical need that Ryan fulfills, she said softly. David smiled wryly and nodded ruefully. Colleen waited to see if he had more to say, then quietly left, closing the door gently. She had been anxious about the conversation, but was proud she managed it well. She believed David would understand how important this was to her and how little it affected their life together. Colleen spent Friday evening and the weekend at home, only leaving for short errands. She invited David to join her, hoping to allay his fears, but he declined. They spoke as needed, with no hostility but also no affection. She knew he needed time to adjust. She tried to initiate lovemaking on Saturday night, but David deflected her attempts. She remained hopeful, believing it was just a matter of time. Monday morning, David left early. Colleen suspected this would continue for a while, but hoped things would eventually return to normal. Midday showers were inconvenient, but a small price to pay to soothe David's feelings. She met with her friends and listened to their stories about their young lovers, thinking about Ryan and feeling her temperature rise. Gail noticed. Are you all right, Colleen? You're getting a little red, Gail asked with concern. I'm fine, just a little warm, Colleen replied, taking a sip of water and trying to focus on the stories again. After another cold Monday night with David, Colleen prepared for her Tuesday with Ryan. He met her at the door in a robe that quickly fell to the floor, and they had a passionate session. After 90 minutes, they relaxed in each other's arms. I know your husband is off limits, Colleen, but how are things at home? Do you feel in danger? Ryan asked with genuine concern. Thank you for your concern, Ryan, but David isn't like that. He's having trouble adjusting and seems distant. He denies avoiding me, Colleen explained. So you're still talking? That's a good sign, Ryan noted. In short phrases, only as necessary. I've assured him I love him and made sure I'm there for him. It'll take time for him to see you're no threat to our marriage, she said. They spent another hour in tender lovemaking before Colleen left. She showered and bathed thoroughly, then read her book while waiting for David. He came home at 7:36 p.m. Hi, honey. How was work? Colleen greeted him warmly. It was fine, David replied curtly. Would you like dinner tonight? She offered. I had a late lunch. I'm fine, he responded. Anything you'd like to talk about? She inquired gently. No, I'll be in the office, he said, turning away. Okay, I'll be here if you need or want me, she added coquettishly. Duly noted. The door closed softly and Colleen was alone again. She wondered how much of his office time was actual work versus avoiding her. Determined to give him space, she read her book, confident she was doing the right thing. For the next several weeks, Colleen continued to meet Ryan every Tuesday and Thursday, enjoying amazing and intense sex. Evenings and weekends with David remained civil but distant. Colleen offered dinner every night, and David always declined, spending his evenings in the office. She read, worked on charity, watched TV, or browsed the internet. Despite the loneliness, she believed she could have both a loving husband and an attentive lover, giving her strength to endure the lonely moments. After 3 months, Colleen noticed a change in David. While his schedule remained the same, he was coming home in a better mood, albeit a little later. They started having dinner together a few nights a week and sometimes watched TV or read together. Although they hadn't resumed lovemaking, Colleen believed this change signaled a shift in David's attitude. However, after another 3 months without physical closeness, their relationship felt more like that of roommates or friends, and she missed their lovemaking. That evening, Colleen decided to address the issue directly. David, I appreciate your understanding about Ryan. I know it hasn't been easy, she began. Well, you didn't give me much choice, Colleen, David replied. I know, and I'm sorry, but I'm concerned about our lack of sex life. We haven't made love since I started seeing Ryan, and I miss it. When might we take the next step? She asked. I haven't told you this, but I have no intention of having sex with you, David said bluntly. David, that's ridiculous. I always make sure I'm very clean for you. There's no reason for us not to have sex, Colleen protested. You made a choice and forced it on me. I can make choices too, David retorted. He got up and went to bed, leaving Colleen stunned. She hadn't expected him to cut off sex. She thought having a lover might spur him on, but now she had to rethink her approach. Colleen decided to ramp up the pressure indirectly. She had kept her distance, hoping David would come around, but now she would turn up the teasing. She would become more physical, wear skimpy clothing to bed, or sleep unclothed. She was determined to make it hard for him to resist. However, her plan failed. For 2 months she tried to entice David, but he didn't respond. It had been 8 months since they last made love. While Ryan met her physical needs, she missed the emotional connection with David and became frustrated. After another month, she decided to make the most of whatever David offered. If he wanted a sexless relationship, so be it. She would express her love in other ways and take what he gave. This decision set them on a new path. On a warm Wednesday morning, Colleen parked her Lexus outside David's building, picked up her purse, signed in at the guard's desk, and made her way to the 7th floor. It had been a while since she'd been there during the day, and she had forgotten how busy the office was. Terry, David's longtime receptionist, noticed her as soon as she stepped off the elevator. "Mrs. Lynch, it's good to see you again. It's been a while since you visited," Terry greeted. "Hello, Terry. Is David in his office?" Colleen asked, already walking that way. "Yes, ma'am, but please wait. They're working with confidential documents this morning, so I need to announce you." Terry picked up the phone and called David's extension. "Mr. Lynch, your wife is here to see you," Terry said. Colleen couldn't hear the response, but soon the conversation ended. "He'll be a couple of minutes, Mrs. Lynch. He needs to secure some documents." Colleen nodded and looked around the office, noticing a mix of familiar and new faces. She noted Eileen's desk was empty, assuming she was in David's office. After a couple of minutes, David's door opened and a beautiful woman walked out. Shorter than Colleen, with long dark brown hair and a prominent chest, she looked to be in her late 20s or early 30s. Colleen disliked her instantly. "Mrs. Lynch, nice to meet you. I'm Alana. Come on back," Alana said, guiding Colleen down the familiar hallway. Alana lingered at the door as Colleen entered David's office. "Thank you, Alana. Take lunch now. We'll continue at 2 o'clock, David instructed. "Yes, sir," Alana responded and left, closing the door behind her. Colleen couldn't help but comment, "How does she manage not to tip over with those things?" David sighed. "I assume you didn't come here to insult my assistant." "What happened to Eileen?" Colleen asked. "She got promoted," David replied. "To what position?" Colleen continued. "Executive assistant. The job was getting too big for her and she needed to slow down. I created a position with less responsibility and no travel," David explained. "So that girl will be traveling with you?" Colleen inquired. "Yes, your jealousy is amusing and ironic, considering the circumstances." "Why are you here, Colleen?" David asked. "To take my husband to lunch," Colleen said firmly. "On a Wednesday?" David sounded surprised. "Yes, because I miss you, David. I wanted to spend time with you and show that I love you," she explained. "Fine. They opened a new Vietnamese place nearby. Let's go," David conceded. They walked mostly in silence, with a few comments on things they saw. Colleen held David's arm, and he didn't seem to mind. They were seated quickly, and the hostess greeted David by name, suggesting he was a regular. They talked about nothing in particular, and David suggested dishes for her to try. Colleen took his hand across the table, and he didn't pull away. "Do you believe I love you, David?" Colleen asked softly. "Love me? My kind of love doesn't allow for what you did, but your kind does." "At least you picked a decent guy," David responded, his tone tinged with sarcasm. "What do you mean? How do you know about Ryan?" Colleen was taken aback. "I had him investigated. I know you go to his condo every Tuesday and Thursday. I noticed you came today to not miss your time with him. But at least he's not a con man or gold digger," David said coolly. "He's not like that," Colleen defended. Famous last words. "But you're right. He seems to be in it just for the Zex," David remarked. "David, let's change the subject. I came to spend time with you and talk about us," Colleen pleaded. "What us, Colleen? We're more like roommates than husband and wife. We haven't made love in nearly a year," David pointed out. "Your choice," Colleen interjected, and David smirked. "Yes, my choice. You chose to cheat on me. So, no Zex, and our time together is just watching TV or being in the same room. That's why I'm here today. I'm not happy with this, and I want to change it. I have no intention of giving up Ryan, but I want our time to be meaningful," Colleen explained earnestly. "That's what you don't get, Colleen. As long as you're seeing Ryan, this is the most it can be," David countered. "I don't accept that, David. Our marriage can be the same. My time with Ryan doesn't affect my time with you. I don't love him. It's just like spending time with friends," Colleen argued. But it is different. I don't mind your time with friends because no one should revolve around one person, but I won't pretend nothing's happening while you're with another man. There were 2 people in our marriage. Now there are 3. It's not the same and never will be. Saying you don't love him and just use him for sex makes it worse. What does that make him? A toy? David questioned, his voice rising with frustration. By the end of his rant, David's voice had steadily grown louder, and Colleen's attempts to calm him were in vain. When he finished, he took out his wallet, placed a $50 bill on the table, and stormed out. Colleen quickly gathered her things, whispered apologies to those around her, oblivious to their disapproving looks, and hurried out of the restaurant. She glanced towards David's office, seeing him walking away in a hurry, knowing she couldn't catch up. So, she took her time and walked to her car. She struggled to hold back her tears until she got into the car, but once inside, she broke down crying. She couldn't understand why her relationship with Ryan was affecting her marriage. Joan and the other ladies had lovers and were still happily married. Why was it so difficult for her? She thought about discussing it with her friends, but decided against it for now. She didn't want them to think she had failed at something they managed so well. She went home and took her usual afternoon shower, not wanting David to think she had gone to Ryan for comfort. She hoped to continue the conversation calmly after David had cooled down, so she took some time to make herself presentable. The reality was that this issue had to be addressed. They couldn't continue as they had been. David came home late, around 9 p.m. He had the courtesy to let Colleen know he would be late, so she made herself dinner and did some light cleaning to keep busy while waiting for him. "David, can we talk, please?" Colleen asked as soon as he walked in. "I don't know what else there is to say, Colleen. You've had an affair despite my objections, and it's been going on for nearly a year. You think the problem is my objection, not the affair itself? We won't agree, so what's the point of talking again?" David replied, his voice heavy with frustration. "Yes, I understand that, but I still believe we could be more than what we are. We've been together for 25 years. Surely we can be more than this," Colleen pleaded. "We are what we are because of your affair, Colleen." "It doesn't make sense," David countered. "David, Joan, Ellen, Gail, and Marge all have happy marriages with lovers on the side. Why can't we do the same?" she argued. David silently laughed, then motioned for Colleen to sit down. "I spoke to their husbands when this started, except Wendell. His affairs are well known, and everyone knows he cheated on Joan first, but I spoke to the others." "About what?" Colleen asked, confused. "Initially, I hoped you'd get this out of your system. I let you go on your dates and even meet Ryan for your afternoon trysts a few times. But after the second time, you made it clear you planned to keep seeing him. So I sought advice from the happy husbands to see how they managed. If they accepted it, maybe they could offer pointers," David explained. "Oh, David, that's sweet. Did they give any advice?" Colleen asked hopefully. "They did, and I've applied many of them," David said, watching Colleen's reaction. Colleen was confused, as she hadn't noticed any changes David had made to strengthen their marriage. "Like what?" she asked. "Did you know that only Rick and Gail continued having sex once Gail took a lover?" David began. "What?" Colleen exclaimed, shocked. "Joan started her affair in response to Wendell's infidelity. When Wendell found out, he stopped being with her altogether. It didn't affect him much," David continued. "I don't believe it. Joan always says they're happy," Colleen said, shaking her head. "She's saving face, Colleen. They spend little time together only for public functions to appear happy. They have separate bedrooms and communicate via texts and emails," David explained. "That can't be true," Colleen protested. Marge was next. She and Norm didn't have much of a marriage to begin with. Nothing bad, just indifferent. When Marge heard about Joan's affair, she did the same. "Their marriage didn't improve, but they're still married, and Marge is happier," David added. "But Marge always praises their marriage," Colleen said, still in disbelief. "Probably like Joan. She wants everyone to think everything is great." "Image is crucial for older, wealthy women, Colleen," David pointed out. "But they're my friends. They'd be honest with me," Colleen insisted. David smiled at this. Gil was next. Rick said he tried to ignore it and continue as usual, but after a few months, it was clear she was bored with him. Ordinary married sex wasn't exciting after her thrilling affair with a younger man. "They haven't been together since," David explained. "I can't believe this. I can't believe my friends would lie about their marriages. The husbands must be trying to make the wives look bad, and I doubt the husbands are going without sex, except Wendell," Colleen said, struggling to accept the truth. "Oh, they're not going without. They have a simple solution to meet those needs," David replied. "Oh, and what is that?" Colleen asked, her curiosity piqued. They hired personal assistants, David said, watching Colleen's reaction. Colleen needed a moment to grasp what that meant. When she finally understood, the new girl David hired seemed unfazed by Colleen's reaction and had been expecting it. I hired Alana shortly after your speech. I was truthful about Eileen needing help in creating another position. Actually, I hired Alana for her business qualifications. She has a business degree and came highly recommended for her skills. For the first couple of months, everything was very professional between us, David said, ignoring his wife's jab. Her job requires us to spend a lot of time together, and we got to know each other well. After a couple of months, I opened up to her about what you were doing. It was such a relief to unburden myself. I felt like a weight had been lifted, David explained. That must have been when I noticed your mood improve, and to think I believed you were coming around, Colleen said, a touch of bitterness in her voice. After that, no topic was off limits. We shared almost everything about ourselves. We've become very close, David continued. When did you start sleeping with her? Colleen asked bluntly. Just a couple of months ago. Unlike you, I'm not the type to jump into bed with someone I met in a coffee shop, David replied, his tone sharp. Colleen winced at the insult. Things had been building for some time. We developed an easygoing relationship with lots of flirting and some innuendo. I was confident she was attracted to me by her actions, light touches, standing close, things like that. And I was certainly attracted to her. One night we stayed late to finish a project. I didn't feel like going home, and she lives alone, so she had nowhere to be. I pulled out a couple of beers and we drank and talked. We were right next to each other on the leather couch in my office, David recounted. Jesus, David, we did it on that couch, Colleen interjected, her voice rising. David just smiled. Okay, I think I've heard enough, Colleen said, trying to maintain her composure. Sorry. Anyway, that was the start. I figured if you could do it, so could I. But I always do it when you're busy. You purposely stayed late to do it, David added. Like I said, Colleen, we're basically roommates now. You made a choice, and I made mine, David stated matter-of-factly. It's not the same, David. My time with Ryan didn't interfere with my time with you. You can't say the same, Colleen argued. True, but the circumstances were different. You went outside the marriage first. I just responded. The truth is you were considerate since you were the first one. Despite my objection, I appreciate that. But frankly, I didn't think I owed you much consideration, David replied, his tone cold. Colleen was hurting. She couldn't get the image of her husband with Alana out of her mind. For the first time, she realized how her relationship with Ryan, despite the boundaries, affected David. She had assumed it would be out of sight, out of mind, but it wasn't. After a few minutes, David spoke again. There's something else I need to tell you, Colleen, David said quietly. What's that? She managed to whisper. Alana's pregnant, about 2 months, David revealed. Colleen's eyes widened and she gasped. As if things weren't bad enough, it just got worse. It's yours? She stammered. She assures me it is. I'll be making sure, David said firmly. Of course. How did this happen? Colleen asked, her voice trembling. David took a deep breath. It was intentional. Colleen's mind reeled from another blow. She wasn't sure how much more she could take, but she had to know everything. Now was the time to get it all out in the open, no matter how much it hurt. You got her pregnant on purpose, but why? She asked, trying to understand. I have a valuable company, Colleen, that we solely own. Currently, I have no one to leave it to. I had planned to sell the company eventually, but I dislike that idea now. My employees are like family, and I didn't want to leave their futures in the hands of a stranger or worse, a conglomerate. Now, depending on the timing, I plan to leave it to Alana or our baby, David explained. Are you divorcing me, David? Colleen asked, fear creeping into her voice. I'm not planning on it, at least not yet. I plan to keep things as they are. Alana wants to marry me and even paid for a prenup heavily in my favor, but she's also okay with things staying as they are, as long as we spend time together. So the status quo is you can keep seeing Ryan, and I'll have Alana, David said. This was Tia. Maybe she was naive, but Colleen never expected things to turn out this way. She stood up and picked up her purse and keys. David, I need some time to process all of this. I'm going to take a drive and might be very late. I'll keep in touch by text, so you won't worry, Colleen said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Colleen left the house and drove aimlessly through the city. How had things gone this far? Her husband had a lover who was young, beautiful, with a dark complexion and long, wavy dark brown hair. She assumed Alana was Hispanic but wasn't sure. She sent periodic texts to David, letting him know she was still driving, and his response was always the same: please be safe. It gave her some comfort that he still cared about her well-being. She finally arrived home around 2 a.m. and walked wearily into the house. David was asleep, but he had considerately left her bedside lamp on. She went into her closet, changed for bed, and found David awake and sitting up when she emerged. "Are you all right, Colleen?" David asked, concern evident in his voice. "Yes, David, I'm fine, but I'm tired. Let's get some sleep and talk tomorrow," she replied. She climbed into bed and slept. They never got around to talking the next day, mostly because there wasn't much else to say. David went to work and Colleen met with her friends. She thought about canceling her afternoon with Ryan, but didn't, and in the end was glad she went through with it. He immediately noticed something was wrong, and instead of an afternoon of sex, they talked. When they did have sex, it was gentle and slow. The next few weeks passed quickly, with Colleen now aware of David's relationship with Alana. David stayed late at the office more often. While she understood, it still hurt Colleen's feelings, and she found herself feeling unwell, spending several evenings entirely in bed. She'd never had a sensitive stomach before, so she took this as a sign that the state of her marriage was deeply affecting her. She finally decided to see a doctor. Colleen Conyers-Lynch stepped off the elevator on the 7th floor of her husband's office building and headed straight for his office. Terry, the receptionist, tried to stop her, knowing that her boss and Alana were in there alone and potentially in a compromising position. "Mrs. Lynch, wait!" Terry called out. Colleen turned to Terry, whom she had always liked, and gave her a gentle smile. "It's all right, Terry, I already know about them, but thank you for your kindness and concern." Terry could only watch as Colleen continued down the hallway to her husband's office. She entered without knocking, finding Alana on her husband's lap. The sound of the door drew their attention, and both heads turned in unison. Alana quickly jumped off his lap and ran into David's private restroom. "Colleen, what on earth are you doing here?" David demanded, shock and annoyance in his voice. "We need to talk, David," Colleen said, as Alana emerged from the restroom. "It couldn't have waited until tonight?" David asked, exasperated. "It could have, but I wanted to do it here since it concerns Alana as well. Shall we sit on the couch?" Colleen suggested. They all sat, with Colleen on one end, David on the other, and Alana perched on the armrest behind David. Colleen extended her arm, handing David a file folder. "What's this?" David asked, taking the folder. "I'm divorcing you," Colleen said calmly. The look on his face was priceless. Were it not for the seriousness of the situation and the pain she felt, she would have found it amusing. "You're divorcing me?" David repeated, incredulous. "Yes, David. I think you'll find the terms agreeable. I've not asked for any part of the company, though I added a little extra in the cash settlement to make up for it. But it's nothing you can't afford," Colleen explained. David glanced through the terms outlined in the filing and saw nothing objectionable. In fact, it was probably less than the court would have awarded her. The settlement wasn't the problem. The only question David had was why? Or rather, why now? "For a couple of reasons, David, but mostly because I love you," Colleen said softly. "You'll have to explain that," David said, his tone confused. "I've loved you since I first met you at Sheila Mullen's pool party when we were 17. We've been together for more than half our lives, almost 26 years. And I want you to be happy. I made a bad choice and damaged us beyond repair, so I'm setting you free to be happy with Alana and your new baby," Colleen explained. Colleen smiled at Alana as her face lit up with the news that she'd get to marry the man she loved. David was more shocked than anything else. "What about you, Colleen?" David asked, still trying to process everything. "Oh, your generosity will more than take care of me for the rest of my life. I'm embarking on a new period of my life, and I'm a little scared. It's exciting," Colleen replied. "Lots of women live alone, Colleen. I'm sure you'll be fine," David said dismissively. "Actually, that's not what I meant. I won't be alone for long. It seems I've gotten myself pregnant," Colleen revealed. David's jaw dropped, and Alana's eyes widened in surprise. The room fell silent as they absorbed the news. The folder of papers hit the floor with a thud as David looked at his soon-to-be ex-wife in shock. They'd never had kids together, preferring their freedom. They had enjoyed living child-free, but now, as their marriage was ending, they were each embarking on a new adventure. Parenthood. "It's Ryan's," Colleen clarified. Even as he said it, David realized what he implied since he hadn't had sex with his wife in months. It had to be Ryan's. Unless Colleen had another lover, he had no desire to hurt or insult her, and was relieved when she took the question in stride. "What kind of woman do you think I am?" Colleen asked with a lighthearted tone and a bit of a chuckle. Oh, I guess we know the answer to that, don't we? Yes, it's Ryan's. Are you two going to make a go of it? David inquired. Ryan is, and always will be, a bachelor. We would never work out, and I don't love him anyway. To his credit, he hasn't denied it and has been very agreeable about child support. I won't need the money, of course, but it's the principle. He's even said he plans to make an effort to be a good father, though he has doubts about his ability, Colleen explained. You're keeping the baby, David stated. Your generosity will allow me the freedom to raise my baby. Plus, I plan to have a full-time live-in nanny, which you will be indirectly paying for. That's why I wanted to keep the house, Colleen responded. I did notice, which rather surprised me, but I wasn't going to argue. You know how much I love that house, and I want to raise my baby there. I think it'll be a good size for us and the nanny, Colleen added. I think you're right. I must say, Colleen, I never expected this, but it makes sense. Do your friends know? David asked. Oh, yes, we had a serious talk about their nonsense and lies. They felt bad for leading me down that path, but I assured them it was my choice. They finally admitted the truth, but I'm still the only one going for a divorce, so I guess that's a point in my favor. You know, if you ever need anything, you can call me, Colleen said. I know, but it's time I stood on my own 2 feet. I went from Dad's house to college to your house. I promise I'll call if I need to, but I plan to do it myself, David assured her. With that, Colleen stood up, and David and Alana did the same. Colleen hugged them both, then turned and walked out the way she came.
Cheated husband discovers wife's secret affairs, delivers cold revenge, and vanishes from her life. Tom was laboring over fresh test data, a tedious yet essential task for him and his team's month-long effort on the test vehicle. Despite its dullness, he found himself correlating and tabulating the information for analysis. Mid-task, his phone buzzed with a text notification, but he paid little attention to the sender's identity. Only after a pause in his work did he glance away from the screen and notice the alert. Curiosity piqued, he picked up his phone, revealing an unfamiliar number with a local area code. Though tempted to dismiss it as spam, he reconsidered, wondering if it might be a colleague's unregistered cell number. Upon opening the message, his initial confusion turned to shock as he found an explicit image displayed on his screen. It took a moment for him to process the unexpected content. A close-up of a woman's private parts, clearly showing a recent calculation. Reading the accompanying text, look closely. You still have time. Bradley's, 6 p.m. He initially dismissed it as a misdirected attempt at solicitation, finding a hint of amusement in the situation. However, a closer examination of the image revealed a tiny detail that froze him in disbelief. A mole near the woman's private parts, unmistakably belonging to his wife Tanya. Doubt flooded his mind as he desperately sought to disprove what he saw, but the evidence only strengthened his conviction. Questions raced through his mind as he recalled Tanya's supposed whereabouts, en route to Boston for a crucial work engagement. Yet, here he was, confronted with an image that suggested otherwise. With the clock ticking towards 5:15 p.m., the timing of the message clashed with Tanya's scheduled landing in Boston at 4:30 p.m. Although she typically checked in upon arrival, it seemed plausible that she was preoccupied with her team's arrangements. Despite the whirlwind of emotions, Tom opted to reply to the text first before considering further action. Not particularly original, but entirely expected. Who is this? How did you obtain this image? Am I expected to meet you at Bradley's? As he prepared to wrap up for the day, he made a firm decision to head to Bradley's. He was determined to get answers one way or another, sending a text to Tanya. How was your flight? I'm going out for a bite. Give me a call when available. He aimed to keep things low-key and gather information discreetly. Walking toward his car, his phone buzzed once more. Assuming it was Tanya, he checked his phone, only to find a response from the mystery sender. I'll be there, but I'm sure you'll find someone more interesting than me. Feeling overwhelmed, he hurried to his car while checking the map on his phone. Bradley's was 30 minutes away, and it was already 5:40. He'd arrive shortly after 6 p.m., uncertain of the importance of timing but hoping he wouldn't miss whoever the texter expected him to meet. During the ride, his phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Tanya. Crazy time with the team. We'll call you later before bed. Love you. He pushed thoughts of their conversation aside. His focus was on his meeting at Bradley's and the mystery surrounding the texter's knowledge of his wife. Arriving at 6:12, his heart raced as he parked. Since the texter hadn't provided any clues about who to look for, he assumed whoever wanted to meet knew him and would approach him. Yet it was the mention of someone more interesting being present that troubled him most. The texter seemed privy to information he didn't possess, and he feared walking into a trap. Without any other means of uncovering the truth, the image of his wife's carnal parts left him in turmoil. He trusted her completely, and their closeness was satisfying, or so he thought. But the only explanation for someone possessing such an image was troubling. And he was minutes away from discovering the truth, a prospect that filled him with dread. Stepping inside, he allowed his eyes to adjust to the dim lighting. Unfamiliar with the pub's layout, he paused by the entrance to survey the surroundings. A spacious dining area lay ahead, with a bar to his left. Choosing a seat near the end of the bar, he ordered a draft and scanned the dining area. His attention was drawn to a man who had just taken his drink order and was making his way across the room toward a table of smiling individuals. And there, at the table, receiving a drink from the well-dressed man, sat Tanya, adorned in her little black dress and pearls, her smile radiant. He moved mechanically, advancing toward the table where Tanya sat. Just a couple of steps away, her expression shifted from a warm smile to wide-eyed fear upon seeing him. Undeterred, Tom continued, reaching the table and seizing a handful of the well-dressed man's hair with his left hand. He yanked back forcefully, causing the man to drop his drinks and stumble backward, yelping in pain as Tom pulled him past. He released his grip, intending to strike him with his right hand, but the man's rapid retreat left Tom out of range, and he landed on the floor. Before Tom could act further, taking a step toward him, Tom recognized Pete and sternly warned him to stay down. Pete, disheveled and soaked in drink, obeyed without uttering a word. Turning back to Tanya, Tom noticed the table had fallen silent. Familiar faces stared back at him, members of Tanya's team, who had shared meals and gatherings at his home. He mused that team loyalty outweighed betrayal, except for one individual who had chosen to reveal the truth. Briefly considering identifying them, he dismissed the idea as futile. Tom informed Tanya that he was going home and suggested that if there was any hope for their marriage, she should come with him now. Tanya nodded in response, however. Before she could rise, he gestured for her to wait and requested a moment before departing. He addressed Betty Wilson and Bob Thoron seated nearby. He asked Betty if Bill thought she was in Boston, and Bob if Alice believed the same. Their avoidance confirmed his suspicions. He pondered whether the whole team was involved, realizing that at least one of them was. The drive home was a blur, ending abruptly in his driveway. Inside, he grabbed a beer and sank into the living room, contemplating his acquaintances, familiar with Bill Wilson and Alice Thoron, but unfamiliar with the other couples present. With uncertainty gnawing at him, he debated contacting Bob or Alice but ultimately decided against it. Instead, he sent them a brief message. Just heard Tanya's travel plans changed. Might want to touch base with that. He left the choice of further investigation in their hands, feeling a sense of closure amidst the chaos. It was roughly 20 minutes later when he heard the garage door open and Tanya pull into the garage. He waited in the living room. She entered, still dressed in her LBD, but without the provocative pumps and jewelry. As she calmly walked into the living room and took a seat opposite him on the sofa, he remained quiet. Understanding the power of silence in any conversation, he was resolute in allowing the silence to persist for as long as necessary. It didn't take Tanya long to speak up. "It's not what you think," she began, but he gestured for her to stop. "You have no clue what I think about tonight's events," Tom replied. "I don't need a detailed explanation. We're both engineers, and we know that there's no real or objective answer to any why question. It's often just an attempt to justify unfavorable outcomes, so I won't ask why. Let's start with something simpler. How long? How many times? How frequently? Do our friends know? Apart from those at the table who cheat, am I labeled as your betrayed man among your work colleagues and our friends?" "No, Tom, it's not like that at all," Tanya protested. "Our team's travel plans got disrupted, and instead of coming home only to travel again tomorrow, Pete suggested we stay in town for a down day before resuming. I didn't see the whole team there." "Where was everyone else?" Tom inquired. "When we received the news, some of the team chose to stay home one more night and meet us at the airport tomorrow," she admitted. "But you chose to deceive me," he pointed out. "You seemed rather close to Pete. Is there anything happening between the star engineer and the wandering program manager that you'd like to tell me?" "Well, for one, Pete's all right, and he persuaded the owners at Bradley's not to press charges," she said in a positive tone. His eyes widened in utter disbelief at her loyalty. "I couldn't care less about your colleague. If he hadn't tripped, I would have punched him. Whether charges are pressed doesn't faze me. I've spent a night in jail before. It's irrelevant. Besides, it could make for interesting testimony," he added with a half smile. Do you love him? Tanya paused, gathering her thoughts. He could tell she was contemplating. Yes, silence was indeed a powerful tool, and his mind raced to fill the void in their conversation. Again, this didn't seem like it would end well. He's not my boyfriend. There's absolutely nothing between us. Yes, I should have informed you about the change in plans, but it seemed trivial. Whether I was in town or Boston, you weren't expecting me, and I was still committed to the team. We were simply having dinner before retiring to our rooms. There was no reason for you to act the way you did. You completely embarrassed me in front of my team, she exclaimed, attempting to bluff her way out of the situation. He unlocked his phone, pulled up the text, and pushed it across the coffee table to her. Judging by her expression, he could tell she recalled the picture and the situation, leaving no room for denial this time. She started speaking, without bravado. He retrieved the phone, started a voice recording app, and tucked it into his shirt pocket. Tom, our team is... She hesitated, searching for words, very close-knit in many ways. Most of us, she began. We have a small group that meets regularly. They were all at Bradley's. We were the ones putting in extra effort for the proposal. You know the time I've spent preparing our pitch. I don't know exactly when it began. It was sometime after Pete became PM. We worked closely together, and I was drawn to him, and things just evolved, Tanya explained. No explanations needed, he interrupted. Falling into bed doesn't just happen. Decisions are made consciously. We both understand that, so please don't insult me. So, almost 6 months. He answered one of his questions. That's when Pete joined, right? She nodded. The team, he continued, all of you. He trailed off without naming it. I mean collectively. She nodded again. Pete mentioned it fosters trust and team unity. Is that what convinced all of you to form a coalition group? Now you're being crude. It's more than that. I feel a strong connection to Pete and my team more than ever, Tanya asserted confidently. He sensed trouble brewing. Unfortunately, you may see some changes in your team soon, Tom warned. What did you do? Tanya gasped. Tom, involving others will only cause more damage. Let them make their own choices. We need to focus on us, Tanya. I can't stay silent and be complicit. I care about Bob and Alice. In fact, I like them a lot more than Betty and Bill right now, he replied. I texted them about the changed plans. How they handle it with their spouses is up to them. I can live with my decision. Tom, we have the most productive team in CR Inc.'s history, she practically yelled at him, and you benefited too, just because our team meetings were on. Wednesdays didn't mean you missed out. I never denied you access to me whenever you needed it, so I slept with my team a bit earlier. You never noticed. That picture you showed me, you want to know about it? She sneered. That was right after Pete finished inside me. Yes, he came inside your loving wife. What you don't see is Betty. She took the picture just before she went down on me. So now you know you never had seconds or tasted another man's seed. If you don't know, it didn't happen, right? Tom listened in shock as the extent of the deception and his own ignorance unfolded before him. Now, just because you're aware, just because your fragile ego is bruised, you want to throw away all that my team and I have achieved? Tanya hissed, her anger escalating. Tom could feel his heart rate rising as Tanya passionately defended her team's questionable dynamic. His own anger was growing by the second. For a fleeting moment during his drive home from Bradley's, he entertained the idea that perhaps forgiving Pete just this once could be possible. However, that notion had quickly met its demise. He didn't need to hear anymore, and he certainly didn't want to. But Tanya persisted. No, sir, we won't let you off the hook. You're going to text Bob and Alice back, informing them that you heard from me and that we were stranded in Atlanta but have reservations for the morning. That's the story Betty and Bill will stick to, and you're going to support them, damn it, she shouted. There are millions on the line with this deal, and your hurt feelings mean absolutely nothing. Send the text, and then we can discuss our next steps. Discuss our next steps, Tom retorted. There's no discussing it. You're leaving now. You and your twisted team, including your ringleader Pete, can carry on however you like. We're finished. I'll be contacting a lawyer this week to get the ball rolling. It's a straightforward 50-50th split. You keep your retirement, and I'll keep mine, Tom declared. But go. You have reservations in town. Use them. Head off to Boston and chalk up another victory for you and your team. Tom, please, send those texts, Tanya pleaded, her tone much softer now. If we lose Betty or Bill before the presentation, the company could lose millions. You and I could miss out on tens, maybe hundreds of thousands in commissions and bonuses. Just imagine all the places we could go with that money, just you and me. Forget about this and reclaim my loyalty. Please, Tom, don't let some irrational concern about meaningless encounters derail us. Pete says I'm on the fast track to executive status. All I have to do is keep delivering results for a few more years. Don't you want that for me, for us? She implored. Tanya, just leave, Tom managed to say before he was struck hard in the back, knocking the wind out of him as he fell to the floor with a knee pressed into his back. Don't hurt him, Tanya interjected. Too much, she added. Still undecided about breaking my nose? Pete taunted as he leaned in close to Tom's face while Tom lay pinned on the floor. Tanya must have a bug, Tom thought. Now I know whose team she's really on. We'll see whose nose gets broken, Pete smirked. Get his damn phone and type those damn texts for him. We don't have time for this nonsense. Someone pulled him up from the floor, just one individual. He pretended to be injured, causing the person behind him to exert significant force to assist him to stand. This provided him with necessary information. His captor was a weak office worker, wheezing from the effort to get Tom on his feet. Tom was catching his breath after being taken by surprise and was refocusing on the situation. In contrast to Pete and his team of well-groomed salespeople, Tom's team operated in the field with the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment SOAR based in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Although his group of engineers didn't match their caliber, spending time with the crews during test missions led to the team being invited to improve their physical condition under the guidance of seasoned workers flown to missions in aircraft modified by Tom's team. If these men appeared at your doorstep, it meant the end of your days on Earth. Tom and his team designed the equipment necessary to access, and more importantly, exit hazardous locations. They took pride in their modifications, contributing to successful missions and the safe return of all involved. The members of the 160th and their formidable passengers deeply appreciated the hard work put in by Tom's crew, with Master Sergeant Troy Baker standing out as the most intimidating figure. MSGT Baker was renowned within his community. Everyone, from recruits to high-ranking officers, showed him the respect he deserved for guiding his men through missions worldwide. He was known for never leaving anyone behind. This reputation was solidified during a mission in Colombia. MSGT Baker had instructed the young LT platoon leader to stick close during their first mission. When the FARC ambushed their group, MSGT Baker thought the LT was performing well for a rookie, until he saw him on the ground, bleeding from a head wound. The medic reported that he had checked for vitals and mentioned that he was gone. Top Baker knelt down and lifted him into a fireman's carry, with the medic reiterating that he was gone. Top Baker responded to the medic's observation, stating that it might be true, but he was still coming home with them. The medic looked at him as if he had lost his mind, considering the more than 5 kilometers trek back to the LZ through dense forest. They would be fortunate to return unscathed, but carrying a deceased individual seemed like a risky decision. Anticipating the medic's thoughts, Baker assured him, "I'd do the same for you, Billy. Stay close in case I need you." What ensued became legendary. Upon their return to the base, the medic informed the doctor that the lieutenant had succumbed. The doctor nodded and retrieved a penlight from his pocket. The medic watched in amazement as the dead lieutenant's pupils contracted in the harsh beam of the penlight. The doc then asked the medic if he cared to revise his diagnosis. As they hurried the revived lieutenant into surgery, he was timeless. He didn't speak much, but when he did, everyone listened. He was a relic in an age of convenience and disposability. He was neither. He was meticulously crafted and unique, and he seemed to hold a special regard for Tom and his team. During the extended periods of downtime between missions, the MSGT expressed his gratitude by instructing Tom and the team in some basic yet effective hand-to-hand defensive techniques. He advised the engineers, "It's better to know something just in case. I understand the biggest threat you're likely to encounter is a malfunctioning copier or a nasty paper cut, but if you remain in this line of work, you may find yourself in some colorful locations. So now, if you happen to encounter one of the local colorful inhabitants, you'll have something practical to rely on," MSGT Baker explained to the group. "But let's hope a paper cut remains the scariest thing you ever have to face." Tom regulated his breathing and allowed himself to appear subdued in the grasp of his captor, while recalling the fighting techniques taught by the MSGT. There might be situations where you feel powerless and can only endure the smacking. It's unfortunate, but it happens. The key is to remember that even when you're taking a smacking, you can still fight back, you just have to outsmart your attacker. Tom remembered the lesson and subtly resisted, gradually wearing down the lone man's strength. "Give me the phone, Tom," Pete demanded, staring him down. "Now you know I've been with your wife, and that every guy on the team has had their way with her. Forget this tough guy act, Tom. You're nothing but a weak, submissive nerd. Do as we say, and maybe you'll still have a chance with Tanya when the team isn't using her. Don't forget about all the luxuries you can afford with her bonus," That should ease the pain. Who knows? Maybe Tanya will even buy you a Keyshawn robot for those times when she's busy. Tom bit his tongue as Pete took pleasure in humiliating him and coercing him into compliance. Pete demanded to know where the phone was. Spotting the outline of the phone in Tom's shirt pocket, Pete reached for it with his right hand. Tom forcefully stepped back, driving his right heel into his captor's shin, causing him to stumble in pain. Flexing his arms, Tom broke free from the hold as his captor yelped and collapsed under his own weight. Pete's eyes widened in recognition. With his right arm extended straight out, Tom rolled his shoulder as taught by the MSGT, driving his clenched fist into the center of Pete's face with full force. He felt bones shatter beneath his fist as a gush of blood poured from Pete's nose, sending him crashing to the floor. Tom turned around to identify his assailant. It was Bill, lying on the floor in tears, clutching his leg. He whimpered that he thought his foot was broken. Tom forcefully stomped on Bill's foot, causing him to scream in agony. Tom remarked, "That should clear up any uncertainty." Turning his attention back, he saw Pete on the floor, hands covering his face, attempting to rise to his knees. Approaching him, Tom leaned in close to Pete's ear and mentioned, "Looks like your nose took the punch. Guess you weren't willing to take one for the team." He then delivered a powerful punch to Pete's temple, knocking him out cold. Adrenaline pumping and breath ragged, Tom scanned the living room for Tanya. Suddenly, he felt a sharp impact to his back and neck, dropping to one knee. He spun around to confront the new attacker. Tanya stood before him, wielding a cast-iron skillet. Her swing had missed, grazing Tom's side. Rising to his feet, he roughly grabbed the pan from her hand. Tanya pleaded with Tom, expressing that they could still salvage the situation. She asked him to consider the money he would be giving up and promised to put an end to the extramarital affairs, vowing to cut them off. She suggested going back to how things were between them. Rubbing the back of his head with his left hand, Tom stared at her, astonished by her sudden transformation. He compared her to the shape-shifting alien in John Carpenter's The Thing, adapting to each new challenge. He smirked at the thought. Misinterpreting his smile as agreement, Tanya moved to embrace Tom. He held her back with his left hand, then, after a brief moment of consideration, swiftly struck her nose with his right hand, fracturing bone but not rendering her unconscious. Tanya cried out and slumped to the floor. Tom remarked, "Hurts like hell, doesn't it?" Tears streaming, vision blurred, breathing labored, and blood everywhere. "Works every time." Tanya, expressing her distress, questioned Tom's motive for punching her. Tom, unapologetic, explained that he struck her because he had the ability to do so. He continued recording the incident, convinced that he had enough evidence to justify his actions, despite the potential negative portrayal. Reflecting on the advice received from the MSGT about decisive action, Tom surveyed the room, noting Bill's distressed state and Tanya's attempts to stem the bleeding from her nose. While others remained still, Tom acknowledged the success of saving someone, giving credit to the MSGT. Discussing the aftermath, Tom expressed frustration about the consequences for Loverboy and Mr. Bill, lamenting the missed opportunities and potential financial losses. He contemplated the implications of involving the police, deciding to delay the call to maintain his chance to question Tanya. Kneeling beside her, Tom demonstrated how to address her nosebleed, but as the adrenaline subsided, he felt a sudden loss of energy. Sitting across from the woman he thought he knew, questioning her actions, Tom wondered about the true extent of Tanya's deception. Expressing disappointment in the betrayal, he inquired about her aspirations, specifically regarding her ambition to become a vice president. Tanya admitted that it could have been worthwhile if Tom had gone along with her plans, expressing regret for the setback caused by the incident. Tom pressed further, questioning the future of their relationship and the persistence of deceit, to which Tanya acknowledged the possibility and the potential continuation of dishonesty. Tom discovered from Tanya that Pete had warned her about his rigid ethics and idealistic views, advising her to break free from his influence to achieve success. In response to Tom's question about when Pete conveyed this advice, Tanya retorted, insinuating Tom's lack of knowledge about certain aspects of her relationship with Pete. Despite Tom's silence, Tanya continued sharing her perspective on career advancement. She revealed that adhering to Tom's suggestions for career enhancement yielded only a few commendations. And it wasn't until Betty offered guidance that she learned what truly worked for women in the workplace. Tanya asserted that engaging in carnal relationships for career advancement was not only effective, but also more enjoyable. Tom, still recording the conversation, processed this information. Curious about the timeline of Tanya's actions, Tom inquired if her involvement in such activities began before Pete entered the picture. Tanya, expressing impatience with his comprehension, disclosed that she initiated such actions at the company's Christmas party a year after joining CR, emphasizing her commitment to this approach ever since. Wait, you're sleeping with the boss too, Art? Art Vanderlei? Tom asked incredulously. Yes, Tom. Art, Pete, Bill, anyone on the team who could help advance my career. It doesn't cost me anything to share some closeness, and it's easy to manipulate you men when I can lead you around by your desires. Especially you. Show a bit of cleavage and I could guide you wherever I needed, she stated. Even now, thinking you have it all figured out, we informed Art of our location when we headed here. Right now, he's gathering the rest of the team, crafting a cover story for our absence. They'll have to make the pitch without us, but the extra effort with their purchasing managers should pay off. Do I really want to hear this? He wondered. Oh, what the heck, why not? Extra effort? Tom prodded. You always were a go-getter, Tanya. It was so easy, I hate to even call it effort, she laughed. What's the old joke? The worst sex I ever had was great. At the BITS conference, it was straightforward with the men. We had to get a bit more creative with Brenda, the token woman on the selection board. It's funny, I can even seduce a woman. But I did throw in old Pete over there as the kicker. She was situationally bi-curious, as I recall. Her situation cleared up about the same time my tongue began lapping at her, with promises of more to come when we started working together after the contract award. Yeah, we have the selection board covered. Why all this then? I mean, if it's all set up, why the strong-arm tactics? Tom asked. That was Pete's idea, the idiot. I told him to cool off, that I would come home and please you, and be back in time to catch the flight. But he had to go all alpha. Look what that got us. So now, instead of being the face of the winning team, I'm back to dealing with Art. Like I said, fixable, but it will set me back. You wouldn't have bought me so cheap, he said. Maybe not, Tanya replied, but I still would have made the flight. Well, you sure as hell ain't making that flight now, he declared. Remembering how Pete seemed so clued in, he figured Tanya must have a transmitter. Art, are you listening? I'm about to call the cops. I'm sure there's a handful of felonies involved here, and we haven't even begun to go down the rabbit trail of fraud. That's a federal contract, isn't it, Tanya? Tom asked rhetorically. Yeah, the feds take a dim view of… How did you phrase it? Extra effort. I'm sure you have great lawyers and all, Art, but maybe there's an alternative. He let it hang for a moment. Then, Tanya's cell phone ringtone played hail to the chief. Art? She asked into the phone. Of course. I'll put you on speaker. Art's voice came through the speaker. First, let me apologize to you, Tom. Pete's actions were a gross lapse of judgment. I can assure you the board will deal with him assertively. Thank you, Art. That eases my mind. Glad to see that you and the board take assault and fraud seriously. Tom, these are all unfortunate allegations. Lawyers will profit, but nobody wants to rock the boat. We might pay a fine, Pete and Bill get community service, but ultimately, you'll be divorced and half as wealthy, Art explained in a businesslike manner. Do I detect an or in this story, Art? Tom inquired. Tanya always said you were the cleverer of the two. Still, I'm happier to have hired Tanya. Yes, Tom, there most decidedly is an or, Art continued. Tom, we at CR have displaced you in your wife's affections, and when you found out and questioned it, you were treated most shabbily. Shocking, Tom chimed in sarcastically. Tom, Art continued, instead of calling the cops as you put it, suppose we could come to an agreement? I just sent a snap to Tanya's phone. Not me, one of my tech boys here. They tell me they disappear after viewing. Have a peek, perhaps that might restore some goodwill. Tanya opened the snap and turned the phone to Tom. He saw the words Bank of Grand Cayman and a number, a very large number. And when would that be deposited? Tom asked. It's already there, Tom. You have an email with the account number. This has been a very bad day for you, Tom. This may be a hard decision for you to make, and I don't discount the emotion. Tanya is a very desirable woman. Be that as it may, however, one can't take emotion to the bank, can one? One can't, Tom agreed, affecting Art's upper-crust clipped manner of speech. CR will cover the costs of your divorce. You can never reconcile, I think we all recognize that. Tanya will file. She will ask for her personal belongings and her retirement. He thought for a moment before replying. On the one hand, he could stand on principle and expose the whole sordid mess and let the chips fall. On the other hand, he could just walk away. Art had just given him 5 million reasons to do just that. Does CR have a medical staff, Art? Tom asked. Ah, yes, Tom, I believe we have some physicians on retainer, Art replied. Good, Tom said. You better load a few into a limo and send them over here to pick up your team. Are we in agreement then, Art? Tanya, Tom replied. Precisely, Art agreed. Are we done, Tom? Art asked. "Goodbye, Art," Tom said, and ended the call. Tom put his phone away, turned off the recording app, and slipped it back into his pocket. "I knew you would see it our way, Tom. We can still be friends. Friends with benefits when this is all over." She summoned up what she thought was her most winning smile. But even her incandescent smile couldn't reverse the effects of her ruined nose. Her eyes were turning black, and the blood was crusted under her nose, dried drips down to her chin. Tom found the sight comical and allowed himself a smile. Once again, Tanya misread his smile for agreement and leaned in to kiss him. Tom extended his right hand to halt Tanya, using it to gently push her back until she landed on the couch with a thud. Expressing disdain, he questioned the notion of wanting to kiss her, leaving Tanya hurt and looking up at him. Declaring his decision, Tom insisted that she remove whatever she wanted by the next day. Walking toward the door, he stopped beside Bill, inquiring about his injured foot. Dismissive of Bill's complaints, Tom kicked him in the groin, causing Bill to curl up and moan. Approaching Pete, who had managed to sit up, Tom assured him he wouldn't physically damage him. Pete, relieved, smiled, but it quickly vanished when Tom's foot applied pressure to Pete's groin. Rolling onto his side in pain, Pete watched as Tom exited the room. He got into his car, unsure where he was going, but food and shelter were high on the hierarchy of needs scale for a good reason. He grabbed a burger from a takeout place, checked into a Red Roof Inn just outside of town near the freeway, and fell asleep as soon as his head hit the pillow. Despite enduring numerous physical strains from various injuries, he rose early the following morning and reluctantly got out of bed. While preparing motel room coffee, his phone chimed, and he eagerly grabbed it. The text message came from the number, and he opened it promptly. "Sorry for yesterday. I can meet, thank God it's Friday at the mall. Nish, I'll wave you over to seats at the bar. I'll be there," he replied, and poured the lukewarm brown water from the coffee maker carafe into the paper cup. With determination, he set up his laptop, gearing up for some online banking, reflecting on his college days, a time predating his relationship with Tanya. Tom recalled his economics professor's advice to maintain an offshore account for unforeseen circumstances. With his professor's assistance, he had established a bank account in the Cayman Islands, which he fondly referred to as his go-to-hell fund. Over the past decade, he diligently contributed to it, and now he boasted an impressive sum of close to $50,000. Tom felt a sense of pride, knowing that his go-to-hell fund was about to receive a significant boost. Tom accessed the secure website for each bank. With his passcode and several keystrokes, he transferred the bulk of CR's payment into his personal account, leaving $100,000 in the original account. After a shower, a change, and getting ready, he headed out to meet the mystery texter. Tom entered "Thank God It's Friday" just past noon. As he entered, he noticed a man waving him over. The man appeared to be about Tom's age, well-dressed and handsome. Tom approached him. "I believe you sent me a text," Tom said as he sat down. "I'm sorry for how it turned out." "I don't know if there was any clean way to tell you," the stranger began. "Why don't you start with who you are and your connection to Tanya?" Tom replied. "I was on the team. I left the Army after 8 years, wounded in action, and had a lengthy recovery before being medically discharged. I joined CR about 6 months ago and was assigned to Pete's team around 3 months ago. While talking to a friend about the job, I mentioned working for Tanya. When he asked for her full name, we realized we had a mutual friend, and he asked me to watch out for Tanya as a favor. At first, everything was great. I was warmly welcomed to the team. It didn't take long to find out why," he started. "About 2 months in, Tanya approached me. She's extremely attractive and compelling, but when I asked her about her ring, she just smiled and told me you were okay with it. I wasn't, and said so. That started the deep freeze. After I turned her down, I got all the undesirable assignments and nothing but grief from Pete. I called our mutual friend back and told him about Tanya approaching me. He told me about you and thought that pimping your wife for pay seemed out of character for the man he knew. He believed there was more to it than Tanya let on, and that you needed to know. Pete sent me the pic when they were trying to get me on board with the team, kind of a prize I could expect if I went along. Let's just say I don't agree with their methods. I resigned yesterday and sent you the text." "Our friend?" Tom asked. "Troy Baker." "If I hadn't met Troy," he replied, then paused a moment before continuing. "Let's just say he helped me out of a scrape when I was a green lieutenant. I owe him a favor or two." "Don't we both?" Tom agreed. "What are you going to do?" "Art pretty much laid it all out for me. I could get the cops involved, and yes, Bill, Pete, and even Tanya would face legal problems. But with his lawyers, it would all end up as a bump in the road. We made a deal. You might think I'm selling out, and maybe you're right in a way. But they stole the only thing I had that was irreplaceable. If I can't make them pay legally, well, at least I can make them pay. It won't bring Tanya back, but I think I may find she's less irreplaceable than I thought. I have a trip planned. Tell Troy thanks for everything. I won't be going back to work. What about you? Tom asked finally. Well, Troy always spoke highly of Baxter Inc. Now that you're gone, they might just need another engineer. I think you'll find they do business a bit differently at Baxter, maybe more to your liking. Challenging, but the fringe benefits won't compare to what Tanya's team was offering. Tom smiled, expressing his acceptance of the arrangement. The stranger stood up, prompting Tom to do the same. With a simple nod to each other, they left without exchanging any further words. Fast forward to Monday, Tom had just completed the check-in process for his flight to Costa Rica. As he contemplated the upcoming relaxation in Tamarindo, he headed toward security. Spotting a mailbox, he pulled out an envelope from his pocket, addressed to the DOJ in Washington, D.C., containing a thumb drive with a recording. He thought it might pique their interest, considering the possibility that Art's legal team might not be as formidable as assumed. Tom dropped the envelope into the box before proceeding into the security line. Update 9 months later, seated at his usual table in the cafe, Tom received mail from Anna, who brought him his cerveza. "Thank you, dear," he said, raising the bottle to his lips. Holding the envelope, he wondered who had found him. Not going to great lengths to stay hidden, finding him in a little town on the Pacific coast of northern Costa Rica would have required resources beyond the ordinary guy's reach. His first thought was that Art's people had found him. Letting the envelope sit at his house for 2 days, he was fairly certain it wasn't a bomb, yet. You can't be too careful. "Carlos," Tom called out to the cafe owner. "Toselo si, Senor Tom?" Tom handed over the envelope and stepped back a few paces. Can never be too careful, he thought as Carlos cut open the envelope. He handed it to Tom, who thanked him, took another pull from his beer bottle, and turned the envelope over. Several sheets of paper fell onto the table. Picking up a note that said, "Thought you would find this interesting," along with a phone number, the number Tom thought Troy would have the resources to find him. "I can live with that." Flipping the other piece of paper over, he found a copy of a newspaper article with a picture. The photo depicted Pete, Bill, Tanya, and Betty being led out of the CR building in handcuffs. The headline for the article read, "4 indicted in multi-million-dollar procurement fraud." He smiled. Maybe Art's lawyers aren't everything he thought they were, he said to himself, a habit he picked up since his Spanish was weak and English wasn't widely spoken. He liked to hear English conversation, even if it was just him talking to himself. "Ana, otra cerveza," he said, holding up his empty bottle. "Sí, mister." "Gracias," Anna said as she accepted his beer. Tom took a swallow and looked out at the deep blue Pacific. "Tanya, who?"
"Please make sure the loan repayment is taken care of." While I was busy at work, an unexpected email appeared, and I quickly reached out to him in response. Jacob Conley began to explain, "Oh, sorry about that. I've fallen for someone else and decided to start a new life with her." Furthermore, he revealed his plan to take the luxury car recently purchased in my name with a loan. Despite my attempts to dissuade him, my husband ignored me, abruptly ended the call, and became unreachable. In the end, Jacob disappeared with his mistress, leaving behind a substantial debt. As a mother to our 10-year-old son, I never envisioned such an unfair situation. I found myself at a loss, unsure of what to do, my mind going blank. At 35 years old, my name is Alice, and my husband Jacob is the same age. We were a family of 3, including our intelligent 10-year-old son Arlo. Arlo had displayed remarkable intelligence from a young age, reading papers on the computer and seeking my opinion on complex topics. In contrast, Jacob was unstable, never holding down a steady job. Despite my full-time job and concerns about our future, Jacob had recently maintained a stable income for 3 years. Lately, Jacob spoke of making memories as a family, leading us to decide on buying a $35,000 camper van. However, due to Jacob's inability to pass the finance company's loan review, I ended up taking the loan for the car. On the eagerly awaited delivery day of the camper van, I received an abrupt email from Jacob stating he would graciously take the delivered van since the loan was in my name, and I would handle the repayments. Confused, I called my husband immediately, only to hear him confess, "Well, I've fallen in love with another woman and decided to date her. I intended it to be just a flame, but it turned serious, so I'm thinking of starting over my life with her." Bye. He mentioned the divorce papers we had discussed during a previous fight, declared he would file them, and unilaterally ended the call. This exchange marked the first time I realized I had been betrayed by Jacob, a shocking blow. Subsequent attempts to contact him yielded no response. When I returned home from work and checked the drawer where the divorce papers should have been, they were already gone, leaving me burdened with a significant debt from a $35,000 car loan. Despite my repeated attempts to reach out to my husband through emails and calls, I never received a reply. Arlo, noticing my unusual behavior, came to check on me with concern after dinner. "Mom, what's wrong? You haven't been eating much lately. Are you okay?" Yeah, maybe I'm just tired." When people lie, they look up to the right. Lying is bad. I've noticed Dad hasn't been home for 3 days. Did something happen between you two?" Startled by Arlo's sharp words, I took a deep breath to calm myself, feeling that I could no longer hide the truth. I decided to tell Arlo everything. "Everything? I see. It's just like Dad to do something like that. Aren't you sad?" No, I kind of understood from how things were going. Arlo, seemingly foreseeing the future, appeared unconcerned about our parents' divorce. But I knew he must feel sad about it in his heart. While silently apologizing to Arlo in my mind, I worked desperately, trying not to think about the dreadful events. However, my body was honest, and gradually my health deteriorated. There was a training session planned at work that day, but I couldn't stand up and ended up squatting down. "Sorry, I can't stand up right now. I need to take a break." I heard my colleagues' voices full of concern, but I couldn't respond and collapsed. When I regained consciousness, I found myself in a hospital room. I received a diagnosis from the doctor that I needed detailed examinations, and I was admitted to the hospital. Alice thought, "I feel so pathetic. It's supposed to be just emotional stress." Looking at the IV drip in my arm and the white ceiling of the hospital room, tears naturally started to flow. At that moment, Arlo, who is usually calm, rushed into the room with an extremely worried look, prompting me to quickly wipe away my tears. "Mom, what happened? Is it serious? You're not going to die, right?" "Of course not. I wouldn't leave my dear son alone." That's good. Really, I was called by the school teacher and told that you were taken to the hospital." I was so shocked, my heart nearly stopped. Arlo, usually mature for his age, but he's still only 10. I felt a strong resolve to get better for his sake. But my condition was worse than I thought, and I was diagnosed with a serious illness. The doctor advised, "You should have surgery as soon as possible. Please make a decision quickly." Following the doctor's advice, I underwent surgery, and by the time I was discharged, it had been a month since Jacob had left. When I returned home and opened the mailbox, I found a demand letter for the car loan payment. Alice thought the repayment should have been automatically deducted from my account. In panic, I checked the account balance with my cash card, and the balance, originally $20,000, was now only $33.90. Alice thought, "Jacob did this. I want to ask him to return the money, but I can't contact him. What should I do? Since I don't have the camper van, I can't sell it." After Jacob left, everything seemed to be going in a bad direction, and my mood sank deeper. Seeing me saddened by my series of misfortunes, Arlo put his hand on my forehead. "You look pale. Are you feeling sick again? You don't seem to have a fever, though." "I'm fine physically, but you see, your father not only took the car, but also all the money we had saved, but I can't work due to my physical condition, and now we have no money. I'm at a loss." "I see. Then I'll deliver newspapers, and I'll search the internet to see if there's any work I can do." Encouraged by my 10-year-old son, I told myself that it wasn't the time to be down. "Sorry for worrying you. I can't afford to be weak. I'll change my mindset and try to do whatever I can," I said, smiling at him. Arlo also smiled back and then said something unexpected. "Let's plan how to get the car back from Dad." "How can we do that?" "The camper van is in your name, right?" "Yes, but what about it?" "Then maybe we can." Arlo suggested an idea that I couldn't even imagine. I had never thought such an idea could exist. Also, I have no idea where your father is. Then let's check on my phone. A month ago, once when we went hiking as a family, surprisingly, Arlo, who is usually very reliable, felt lost. At that time, we bought a kid's cell phone on suggestion and installed the GPS app on it, which both Jacob and I could access. With this app, I can see where Dad is in real time, and he's been moving around a lot. Oh, is that so? But what if we find him, and he just says something vague and escapes again? As I pondered this, Arlo smiled and made an intriguing suggestion. Don't worry. I've already taken precautions. What did you just say? To my astonishment, Arlo had acted independently while I was in the hospital, achieving something unbelievable. I thought I can't believe such a smart child came from me. Understanding Arlo's words, I was simply amazed. He had even caught wind of Jacob's mistress. All right, let's teach Dad, who betrayed us, a lesson. Okay, let's start the plan right away. Together, my son and I prepared for that moment. Alice thought, with Arlo by my side, I'm invincible. Bring it on, anywhere, anytime. 3 days later, my phone rang. Ah, it's me. Please, I need your help. Oh, who might this be? Don't play dumb. It's your husband, obviously. I'm being questioned by the police about you. At this rate, they might ask me to come to the police station voluntarily. Help me out. Oh, is that so? Just wait a moment. Then I immediately went with my son to where Jacob was, and to my surprise, it was a forest park near our house where camping was possible. Jacob was being questioned by the police in front of his car, looking bewildered, feeling pathetic. I sighed and told the police we needed to have a talk as a couple and asked them to leave for a while. At that time, Jacob seemed uncomfortable being watched by the people around us and urged Arlo and me to get into the car. Inside the car, Jacob's mistress was sitting cross-legged, glaring at us, but that was no longer important. Sorry about that. Thanks for coming, but why did the police suddenly show up at my place? I don't get it. That's because I filed a report about the missing camper van. What? Why would you do that? It's obvious, isn't it? My car was stolen. Jacob, foolishly thinking that actions between spouses can't be criminal, was saying nonsensical things, but the world isn't that naive, you know. You filed for divorce, remember? Forgot? So we are strangers now, and driving a stranger's car without permission, that's a crime. Arlo figured all this out, typical, sharp as ever. But I didn't steal the car. I just borrowed it for a bit. Oh, is that so? Well, I'd like to use my car now, so could you return it? That would be really helpful. As I reached out my hand asking Jacob to return the keys, he reluctantly handed them over. After confirming it was returned, Arlo quietly started talking. Hey, why did you abandon your family and choose to play around with this woman? Caught off guard by his son's unexpected question, Jacob was flustered and awkwardly scratched his head. Seeing this, Jacob's mistress chuckled smugly and started talking. It's because I'm more attractive than your mother. Look at me, you can see it, right? He fell head over heels for me and decided to leave his family. Quiet. I didn't ask you, old lady. Dad, you answer. Grace was silenced by Arlo's stern tone, but Jacob remained quiet. If you can't explain, that's fine. I'll just have the police come back and arrest you. Wait, hold on. Okay, I'll talk. Grace, it turns out, joined Jacob's company 3 months ago. They were attracted to each other and became involved at the welcome party for new employees. Later, it was discovered that Grace was pregnant, and Jacob decided to start a new life with her, leaving us behind. Why did you take the camper van? I quit my job and thought about selling the car for money. But it seems like you were using it quite a bit, weren't you? I thought it was a waste to sell it right away, so we decided to go on a trip. Wait, how do you know all this? Remember when Arlo got lost? After that, as a precaution, we bought him a kid's cell phone and installed the GPS app. Did you forget? We installed it on your phone too, so I knew where you were all this time. By the way, I later found out from Arlo that he had pretended to get lost during our family hike. Because he wanted a cell phone, I was amazed at Arlo's ability to think and act so strategically. I suspected something was off with Dad, so I came up with this plan to monitor his actions. You really are a terrifying child. I will never become an adult like you, Dad, who betrays important people without a second thought. Jacob, faced with the hard truth Arlo told, was a pitiful adult, unable to offer any rebuttal. In contrast, seeing Arlo, only 10 but able to think and speak his mind firmly, gave me a sense of strength. As a mother, I felt I couldn't lose, especially in settling things properly. Also, return the $20,000 you withdrew from my account right now. That was our joint property as a couple. I don't have to return it. No, it's not that. The money was what I saved little by little since I was single. After all, you always quit your jobs midway, so we hardly ever saved money together, did we? I was appalled to hear that the $20,000 had been squandered by Jacob and his mistress. It was the moment I felt relieved about divorcing him. So that's how it is. But if you stole and used the car and my money, that's going to be a serious crime. What? I just sent the police away, so it's not their business anymore, right? I only said we would talk. I have no intention of withdrawing the complaint. I must add the theft of my money to the report. Mom, should I call the police now? I can do it with just one button on my phone. Grace, Jacob's mistress, had been watching our conversation but quickly tried to get out of the camper van. At that moment, she let out a scream that echoed around. The reason was that outside the car door, Grace's parents were standing there, faces red with anger, about to explode in fury. Startled, she stepped back as her parents yelled at her. I'm sorry. Don't be so angry. But why are you here, Mom and Dad? I called your parents beforehand. What? Why? The truth was, during my hospital stay, Arlo had visited Jacob's office and tearfully told them, my dad left the house with a woman we don't know, and my mom collapsed. Seeing Arlo's sorrowful and frail state, the people at Jacob's office suspected Grace, who had left the company with Jacob, and gave Arlo her parents' address. Jacob and Grace had been overly friendly at the office, and there were photos showing them together at the welcome party for new employees, looking like a couple. After learning from the office people that you commuted from your parents' house, Grace's parents were standing there, faces red with anger. I went there with your photo, and your parents came out when I visited. Then I told them everything that had happened. So today, I contacted Grace's parents and asked them to wait nearby for a while. How could you do this to me? The worst. I don't want to hear that from you. That's my line. By the way, your stomach seems quite big. When is the baby due? In 3 months. What? Wait a minute, that doesn't add up with when you met my husband. You two met only 3 months ago. What's going on? It's not time for the baby to be born yet. Jacob, hearing this for the first time, stared at Grace, eyes wide. Wait, what does that mean? Are you stupid? Don't you get it? It takes about 9 months from conception to birth, which means the child she's carrying isn't yours. You're so foolish. What do you mean, Grace? Have you been deceiving me? I almost got away with it. Can't help it now that I'm caught. You're so naive, you can't see through lies at all. Really, a fool. Don't mock me. My whole life is ruined because of you. What were you thinking? Grace and Jacob started an ugly argument, but nobody intervened, letting them have it out. Meanwhile, we contacted the police again to explain the situation. As it began to get dark, the forest park was brightly lit by the red lights of the police cars. No, really, I was wrong. I was truly wrong. I'm sorry. I'll work hard and never cheat again, so please just don't arrest me. Dad, people don't change that easily, especially lazy people like you. Exactly. Arlo's right. I can't trust you at all. Reflect on your actions and pay for your crimes at the police station. If I get arrested, I won't be able to pay back the money, Is that okay with you? I don't mind. Pay me back after you've atoned for your sins. Take your time. Don't worry, I've already found you a place to work. Let's see, there's Arlo's child support, plus the $220,000 you stole from me. I'm not sure how much it will all add up to, but you'll work and pay it all back. I had one last thing to say to Grace, the mistress. You might think you're just an onlooker, but don't forget, you're an accomplice to Jacob's theft. Be prepared for that. When I told them that Grace would have to pay if Jacob couldn't return the stolen money, she shivered in fear. Grace asked her parents for help, but they refused, saying, "We disown a daughter who causes trouble for others." Thus, Jacob and Grace were taken away in a police car together. Thanks to Arlo's smart strategy, we were able to punish Jacob and his mistress, Grace. Though they were released from detention soon after, they faced a hefty payment to me through a lawyer. I claimed $20,000 in damages. Additionally, I made Jacob agree to pay $500 a month in child support for Arlo. I introduced Jacob to a subcontracting factory of the company I work for. The support and other charges I claimed from Jacob would be deducted from his salary and paid into my account. I also sold the camper van and was freed from the auto loan. Since then, my health has improved remarkably, and I am now energetic, committed to my job. Arlo has been actively helping with household chores and errands. I want to keep moving forward strongly so that Arlo can pursue the path he loves without giving up.
Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Cheating Tales Lab. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. Marshall Huffman's polished Oxford shoes clicked against the marble floors of Pinnacle Acquisition's executive floor. At 48, he cut an imposing figure, 6'2", broad-shouldered, with steel gray eyes that could dissect a balance sheet as easily as they could read a room. His tailored charcoal suit spoke of success, but it was his presence that commanded respect. "Morning, Mr. Huffman," his assistant Sarah called out as he passed her desk. "The Q3 merger projections are on your desk, and Mr. Lancaster wants to see you at 11. Marshall nodded, his mind already processing the day ahead. "Thanks, Sarah. Push the Transglobal meeting to 2. I want to review those projections first." Inside his corner office, Marshall settled into his leather chair, taking in the Manhattan skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. 23 years at Pinnacle had earned him this view, along with the CFO position that made him Robert Lancaster's right hand. The thought of his CEO brought a slight frown to his otherwise composed features. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife, Isabella. "Charity committee meeting with Robert today. Don't wait up for dinner." Marshall's thumb hovered over the message. These meetings had become more frequent lately. He dismissed the thought. Isabella had been managing their social calendar for 15 years, and her networking had only helped their family's position. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Alexandra, his eldest daughter, strode in with the confidence of someone who already saw herself in his chair. At 22, fresh from Harvard Business School, she carried herself with the polished grace of old money Marshall had worked decades to provide. "Dad," she said, perching on the edge of his desk rather than taking a seat. "Robert mentioned there might be an opening in strategic planning. I thought I'd stop by and remind you that my Harvard network could be valuable there." Marshall studied his daughter's face. She had Isabella's features, the same honey blonde hair and green eyes. But lately, he'd noticed something else in her expression. Something calculated. "Alexandra, we've discussed this. Entry-level position. Please," she cut him off with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "We both know I'm not entry-level material. Robert agrees with me." The casual use of his CEO's first name didn't escape Marshall's notice. He maintained his neutral expression, years of high-stakes negotiations serving him well. "We'll discuss this at home," he said firmly. "I have the Transglobal merger to focus on." Alexandra's smile tightened. "Of course, Dad. Mother's hosting dinner next week with the Lancaster family. Maybe we can discuss it then." After she left, Marshall pulled up the Transglobal merger documents. The deal would be his largest yet, a $4.2 billion acquisition that would cement Pinnacle's position in the market. His phone buzzed again with a group text from his twins, Thomas and Timothy. Dad, need to discuss summer internship. Robert mentioned positions opening up. Marshall's jaw tightened. When had his CEO become so involved with his children's careers? The twins were only 19, sophomores at Yale, yet they spoke of Robert with a familiarity that seemed presumptuous for their age. A video call notification popped up on his screen. Victoria, his 17-year-old daughter, from her boarding school. Dad. Her face filled the screen, the prestigious Westfield Academy's limestone buildings visible behind her. The school's endowment committee is reviewing donations. Mr. Lancaster said you'd handle it? Victoria, why are you talking to Robert about school donations? She rolled her eyes in a way that reminded him too much of Isabella. Mom said to ask him first. You're always so busy with work stuff. I am busy, Marshall replied, ensuring your tuition is paid and your trust fund grows. Speaking of which, how's your brother? Andrew's fine. He's probably in lacrosse practice. Oh, Mother said to remind you about next Thursday's dinner. After ending the call, Marshall leaned back in his chair, his mind working with the precision that had made him one of Wall Street's most respected CFOs. Something felt off, like when the numbers in a merger proposal didn't quite add up. The rest of his day passed in a blur of meetings and conference calls. The transglobal merger consumed most of his attention. The deal had to be perfect. By evening, most of Pinnacle's employees had left, leaving the office floors in silence. Sarah stopped by his office one last time. Mr. Huffman, will you be needing anything else?
Mr. Lancaster and Mrs. Huffman left about an hour ago. Another charity meeting, I believe.
Marshall noted the slight hesitation in Sarah's voice. No, thank you, Sarah. Have a good evening. He worked for another hour, reviewing performance reports and bonus structures. His own bonuses had been exceptionally generous over the years, Robert's way of recognizing his contribution to Pinnacle's growth. Those bonuses had funded their mansion in Greenwich, the children's education, Isabella's social endeavors. At 9:30, Marshall decided to head home early. The house would likely be empty. Isabella's charity meetings often ran late, but he had financial models to review in his home office. The drive to Greenwich was quiet, his Mercedes cutting through the cool autumn night. Their estate's gates opened automatically, security cameras tracking his car's progress up the winding driveway. The house stood impressively against the dark sky. 6 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, a testament to his success. He was about to enter through the front door when he noticed lights in the family room. Voices drifted through the partially open French doors. Isabella's laugh, the one she reserved for social occasions, made him pause. Your real father is Robert Lancaster. Isabella's voice carried clearly through the gap. Marshall's hand froze on the door handle. Inside, he could see his family gathered in the warm light of their family room. Isabella stood by the fireplace, looking elegant in an expensive dress he didn't recognize. Their children sat around her, expressions ranging from amusement to conspiracy. He's been funding everything through your dad's bonuses, Isabella continued, swirling wine in a crystal glass. Once the transglobal merger closes next month, we'll take control of everything. Marshall's too focused on spreadsheets to notice he's just been our front man. The words hit Marshall like physical blows, but decades of corporate negotiations had taught him to control his reactions. He remained perfectly still, gathering intelligence like he would in a hostile takeover. Alexandra's laugh cut through the room. Dad's such a fool. He actually thinks he earned those bonuses. Robert showed me the real books. Every penny was planned. Your father, Isabella emphasized the word with mock sweetness, has been useful. His financial expertise made everything look legitimate. The board trusts him completely. But why keep him around so long? Thomas or Timothy asked. Marshall couldn't see which twin had spoken. Because, darling, Isabella's voice dripped with condescension. Marshall's reputation is impeccable. No one questions his financial decisions. Robert needed that credibility. And the merger? Victoria's voice now, eager to be part of the adult conversation. Will be our masterpiece. Robert Lancaster's voice emerged from a corner of the room Marshall couldn't see. Once it closes, the transfer of assets will be untraceable. Marshall's signature on everything makes it perfectly legal. What about the other shareholders? Andrew asked, surprising Marshall with his grasp of corporate matters. Robert's laugh was cold. They'll be too busy dealing with the merger's fallout to notice where the money went. By the time anyone realizes what happened, we'll be settled somewhere without extradition treaties. And Marshall? Isabella asked, an edge to her voice that Marshall had never heard before. We'll take the fall, Robert replied casually. His signatures are on everything. The board will assume he orchestrated the whole thing. Quite poetic, really. The trusted CFO betraying everyone. Alexandra's Harvard connections will help smooth the transition, Isabella added proudly. No one will question her taking over his position afterward. We've planned everything perfectly. Marshall watched his oldest daughter beam at the praise. The Harvard Alumni Association already thinks I'm following in Dad's footsteps. They have no idea whose footsteps I'm really following. The twins high-fived each other. Yale's business school won't know what hit them, one of them said. Robert's donations guaranteed our spots. When do we tell him? Victoria asked, sounding younger than her 17 years. Tell him? Isabella laughed. Oh, darling, Marshall won't need to be told anything. Once the merger closes, everything will happen so fast he won't know what hit him. Robert has arranged for certain irregularities to be discovered. Marshall's reputation will be destroyed so thoroughly, no one will believe a word he says. The timing has to be perfect, Robert added. The transglobal merger is complex enough that any financial discrepancies will be buried in the details. Marshall's own thoroughness works against him. He's documented everything so meticulously that his signature on the fraudulent documents will be unquestionable. Marshall had heard enough. With the same silent precision he used in corporate takeovers, he withdrew from the door. His mind was already cataloging information, forming strategies, identifying weaknesses in their plan. He made his way to his home office, careful not to make a sound. The room was his sanctuary, a place where he had structured countless deals, orchestrated mergers that had made Pinnacle a powerhouse. Now it would serve a different purpose. Logging into his secure terminal, Marshall began pulling up records. Years of transaction histories, bonus payments, offshore transfers, everything he had overseen as CFO. But now he looked at them with new eyes, seeing the pattern he had missed. Each major merger had corresponded with substantial bonuses to his accounts. Those bonuses had then been quietly transferred to shell companies, companies he now recognized as being controlled by Isabella. Robert had used Marshall's legitimate merger work as cover for massive fraud, while secretly transferring company assets through Marshall's bonuses into accounts his wife controlled. The scheme was brilliant in its simplicity. Marshall's reputation for financial integrity had made him the perfect unwitting accomplice. Every successful deal he closed for Pinnacle had been used to hide their fraudulent transfers. His own legitimate earnings had masked the illegal flow of funds. More disturbing were the documents he found regarding Alexandra. His daughter's Harvard admission, her internships, her entire career path, all had been orchestrated by Robert and Isabella. They had been grooming her to take over Marshall's position after the merger, using her Harvard connections to legitimize the transition. The transglobal merger would be their masterstroke. Marshall could see it clearly now. The complex transaction would provide cover for the largest asset transfer yet. By the time anyone unraveled the details, Robert and Isabella would be gone, along with billions in company assets. Marshall would be left to face federal investigators, his signature on countless fraudulent documents. Hours passed as Marshall dug deeper, documenting everything. His financial expertise, the very skill Robert and Isabella had exploited, now served to uncover their decade-long conspiracy. Every transaction, every transfer, every false document, Marshall captured it all. Dawn was breaking when he finally leaned back in his chair. In the growing light, he could hear movement in the house, his family starting their day, unaware that their carefully constructed plan was about to implode. Marshall allowed himself a small, cold smile. They had underestimated him badly. They saw what they wanted to see. The predictable CFO, too focused on spreadsheets to notice their betrayal. They forgot that those same spreadsheets had helped him orchestrate some of the most complex corporate takeovers in recent history. A knock at his office door. Dad, Alexandra's voice. You're home early. Mother said you had a late meeting. Just reviewing some merger documents. Marshall replied evenly. How's the Harvard Alumni Association these days? Oh, networking, making connections. Robert think. I'm sure he does. Marshall cut her off smoothly. Tell your mother I'll be working from home today. The trans-global merger needs my full attention. After Alexandra left, Marshall began composing emails. The board would need to be informed. Evidence would need to be distributed. Assets would need to be secured. But first, he had some calls to make to certain foreign banks. Let Robert and Isabella think they had orchestrated the perfect plan. Marshall hadn't become Pinnacle's CFO by being predictable. By the time they realized their mistake, it would be far too late. The morning sun cast long shadows across his desk as Marshall began implementing his counterattack. In the house beyond his office, his family went about their morning routines, confident in their secrets. Marshall allowed himself another small smile. They had taught him an invaluable lesson about family loyalty. He intended to show them exactly how well he had learned it. Marshall's fingers moved across his keyboard with surgical precision. Dawn's first light crept through his home office windows, but he hadn't slept. Sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford, not when every minute counted. His computer screens displayed a complex web of financial transactions. 10 years of performance bonuses stretched across multiple spreadsheets, each one a perfectly orchestrated lie. Robert Lancaster's signature appeared consistently alongside his own, a detail that brought a cold smile to Marshall's face. Amateur, he muttered, documenting another fraudulent transfer. Robert had been clever, but he'd made a crucial mistake. He'd assumed Marshall's financial expertise was limited to legitimate transactions. Sarah, his assistant, answered on the first ring despite the early hour. Mr. Huffman? Sarah, I need complete access to all merger documents from the past decade. Every signature, every amendment, every appendix. And Sarah? Use the secure server. No one else needs to know. Of course, Mr. Huffman. Should I inform Mr. Lancaster? No need. He'll find out soon enough. Marshall disconnected the call and pulled up the trans-global merger documents. The deal's complexity had been deliberate. Robert and Isabella had planned to use it as cover for their final heist. But complexity cut both ways. A notification popped up, access granted to the secure server. Marshall's hands flew across the keyboard, his mind dissecting years of financial manipulation. Robert's pattern emerged clearly now. Artificially inflated company valuations, funds funneled through Marshall's bonuses, assets quietly transferred to shell companies owned by Isabella. Sloppy, Marshall commented, noting how Robert had used the same offshore banks repeatedly. Predictable. He accessed Pinnacle's main financial system using his CFO credentials. Robert had never understood the full extent of Marshall's system access, another fatal mistake. Within hours, Marshall had traced every fraudulent transaction, documented every illegal transfer, mapped every shell company connection. His phone buzzed. Isabella. Darling, are you coming to breakfast? The children are asking for you. Marshall's voice remained perfectly pleasant. Still working on the trans-global merger. Don't wait for me, Robert called. He wants to discuss some last-minute details. I'm sure he does. After hanging up, Marshall accessed a secure line to contact James Chen, his personal attorney, one whose existence neither Robert nor Isabella knew about. James, initiate Protocol 7. Yes, all of it. And James? Make it ironclad. The next hours passed in a blur of precise financial maneuvers. Marshall methodically transferred all legitimate company assets into secure holding companies, his actions masked by the merger's normal activities. Robert's planned poison pills were identified and neutralized one by one. A knock at his office door. Dad. Alexandra's voice. Mother says you've been in here all night. The merger requires attention, Alexandra. Or perhaps Robert hasn't explained that part to you. A pause. I don't know what you mean. Of course not. Tell your mother I'll be busy all day. The trans-global deal needs my personal touch. After Alexandra's footsteps faded, Marshall accessed another secure line. Mr. Zhao? Yes, about those offshore accounts. Execute option B. All of them. By mid-morning, Marshall had compiled an exhaustive record of Robert and Isabella's decade-long conspiracy. Every fraudulent transaction, every manipulated valuation, every illicit transfer, all documented with meticulous precision. His findings revealed the true scope of Robert's ambition. The transglobal merger wasn't just another deal. It was meant to be a corporate extinction event. Sarah's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Huffman, Mr. Lancaster is asking about the merger documents. Tell him they'll be ready by end of day." "And Sarah? Thank you for your loyalty over the years." Marshall turned to the wall safe hidden behind an original Rothko, a gift from Robert, ironically. Inside lay USB drives containing evidence of tax fraud, embezzlement, and securities violations. Each drive was perfectly organized, ready for distribution to board members. His phone buzzed again. Thomas and Timothy in a group chat. "Dad, Robert mentioned board meeting tomorrow. Still good for Yale summer internships?"
Can't.
Marshall's reply was brief. "Focus on your studies. Tomorrow will be educational." A separate message from Victoria. "Dad, Mother says you're being difficult about the merger." Robert think. He cut off the message. His youngest children, Victoria and Andrew, would learn soon enough about their mother's true nature. By afternoon, Marshall had discovered something even more damning. Robert hadn't just been documenting the fraud. He'd been keeping detailed records of Isabella's involvement, obviously planning to use it as leverage. The records included Isabella's parallel schemes at their children's private schools, where she'd been embezzling from charity foundations she managed. Protecting himself while betraying her, Marshall noted. How appropriate. He accessed another secure line. "Agent Phillips? Yes, it's time. Everything will be on your desk by morning." "And the offshore accounts?" "Yes, all of them. You'll find Mrs. Huffman's fingerprints particularly interesting." The sun was setting when Marshall finished his final preparations. His counterattack was orchestrated with the same precision he'd applied to his most successful mergers. Every detail was accounted for, every contingency planned for. Sarah's voice came through one last time. "Mr. Huffman? The board members are confirmed for tomorrow's emergency meeting." "Thank you, Sarah. One last thing. Please ensure those USB drives are placed at their seats before the meeting." Marshall stood at his office window, watching the estate's security cameras on his tablet. Isabella's car was pulling up. Another charity meeting with Robert had run late. His children's vehicles were all accounted for, everyone home for what they thought would be a normal family dinner. His phone buzzed with a message from Robert. "Marshall, need to discuss some concerning irregularities in the merger documents. Urgent meeting tomorrow, 8 a.m. Marshall allowed himself a small smile as he typed his reply. "Of course, Robert. I found some irregularities myself. Tomorrow will be illuminating." He watched through the security feed as Isabella entered the house, her designer handbag, a gift from Robert, swinging carelessly. Alexandra's voice drifted up from downstairs, discussing Harvard Alumni Association contacts. The twins were arguing about Yale's business school requirements, while Victoria and Andrew debated which summer house they'd use after the merger. Marshall turned back to his computers, implementing the final phases of his plan. By morning, Robert and Isabella's carefully constructed world would collapse. The evidence was irrefutable, the documentation perfect, the trap inescapable. His phone buzzed one last time. Isabella again. "Darling, aren't you joining us for dinner?" The children want to discuss their future plans. Marshall's reply was succinct. "Still working. The future requires careful planning." He turned back to his work, his movements precise and purposeful. They had taught him valuable lessons about family, loyalty, and betrayal. Tomorrow, he would demonstrate exactly how well he had learned them. The night deepened as Marshall executed the final stages of his counterattack. Each move was calculated, each action deliberate. Robert and Isabella had spent a decade building their fraudulent empire. Marshall would dismantle it in a single day. Sarah's final message of the night appeared. "Everything is in place, Mr. Huffman. The board members will receive their notifications at dawn." "Thank you, Sarah. Tomorrow will be a day of revelations." In the house below, his family continued their evening, unaware that their carefully constructed facade was about to shatter. Marshall allowed himself another small, cold smile. They had mistaken his precision for predictability, his attention to detail for blindness, his loyalty for weakness. Tomorrow, they would understand their error. The night grew later, but Marshall's focus never wavered. His screens displayed the culmination of his work, a comprehensive map of Robert and Isabella's criminal enterprise, ready to be exposed to the world. Every transaction traced, every fraud documented, every betrayal cataloged. His phone's final notification of the night was from Robert Lancaster's private number. "Marshall, Isabella mentioned you've been working late. Any concerns about tomorrow's board meeting?" Marshall's response was carefully measured. "No concerns, Robert. Just ensuring everything is properly documented. See you at 8. He turned back to his screens, implementing the last phases of his plan. They had spent years underestimating him, seeing only what they wanted to see. Tomorrow, they would learn the cost of that mistake. In the quiet of his office, Marshall continued his work, his movements precise, his purpose clear. They had taught him that family loyalty was a weapon. He intended to show them exactly how sharp that weapon could be. Dawn approached, bringing with it the promise of revelation. Marshall's counterattack was ready, every detail perfect, every trap set. Robert and Isabella had orchestrated what they thought was the perfect plan. Tomorrow, they would learn otherwise. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Marshall completed his final preparations. The documentation was perfect, the evidence irrefutable, the trap inescapable. In a few hours, the board would convene, and the carefully constructed illusion of the past decade would shatter. His phone lit up with one last message from Isabella. "Darling, you've been in there all night. The children are worried." Marshall's reply was brief. "The future requires sacrifice. Sleep well, Isabella." He turned back to his screens, reviewing his work one final time. They had taught him valuable lessons about family, loyalty, and betrayal. Tomorrow, he would demonstrate exactly how well he had learned them. The night deepened into its final hours as Marshall executed the last stages of his counterattack. Each move was calculated, each action deliberate. Robert and Isabella had spent years building their fraudulent empire. Marshall would dismantle it in a single morning. Sarah's final message appeared. "All preparations are complete, Mr. Huffman. The board members will receive their notifications at dawn." "Thank you, Sarah. Tomorrow will be a day of reckoning." In the house below, his family slept peacefully, unaware that their carefully constructed world was about to collapse. Marshall allowed himself one last, cold smile. They had mistaken his precision for predictability, his attention to detail for blindness, his loyalty for weakness. Tomorrow, they would understand their error. The night grew later, but Marshall's focus never wavered. His screens displayed the culmination of his work, a comprehensive map of Robert and Isabella's criminal enterprise, ready to be exposed to the light of day. Every transaction traced, every fraud documented, every betrayal cataloged. As dawn approached, Marshall sat back in his chair, surveying his work. The trap was set, the evidence compiled, the counterattack ready. They had spent years underestimating him, seeing only what they wanted to see. Tomorrow, they would learn the cost of that mistake. Robert Lancaster strode through Pinnacle's executive terminal, his private jet waiting on the tarmac. Behind him, Bloomberg terminals flashed red as news of the fraud allegations decimated Pinnacle's stock price. The trans-global merger was imploding spectacularly, exactly as Marshall had planned. Mr. Lancaster, his pilot, James Wilson, greeted him at the terminal. "Weather looks clear to the Caymans." Robert barely acknowledged him, too busy barking orders into his phone. "Move everything. I don't care about the fees. Empty all the accounts now." "Problems, sir?" Wilson asked, taking Robert's briefcase. "Just fly the damn plane, Wilson." What Robert didn't know was that Wilson had been Marshall's plant for years, placed specifically for this moment. As they took off, Wilson entered coordinates not for the Caymans, but for a private airstrip where FBI agents waited. Meanwhile, at the Greenwich estate, Isabella frantically dialed numbers on her phone. "What do you mean the accounts are empty?" she screamed at her Swiss banker. "Check again." "Madam Huffman, the accounts were cleared 3 days ago." "Mr. Lancaster's orders." Isabella's perfectly manicured hand trembled as she opened her laptop, accessing the offshore accounts one by one. Each login revealed the same truth. Robert had betrayed her. Her phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "Sorry, darling. Business is business." On her screen, a new email appeared from Marshall's attorney. The subject line, Prenuptial Agreement, Section 7.4. In downtown Manhattan, Alexandra burst into tears as the Harvard Alumni Association rescinded her job offer. Due to emerging allegations of academic fraud, the twins weren't faring better. Yale's Dean of Admissions had some pointed questions about their acceptance and certain donations made by Robert Lancaster. Victoria and Andrew huddled in their respective boarding school dormitories, watching their family's disgrace unfold on national news. Marshall observed it all from a secure location, his laptop displaying multiple feeds. Robert's plane changing course, Isabella's failed bank logins, the federal agents swarming their estate. Mr. Huffman, Agent Phillips reported via secure line. Mr. Lancaster's plane is being diverted now. Would you like to watch the arrest? No need, Marshall replied. Send me the paperwork when it's done. 3 months later, Marshall sat in his new office, the CEO's suite at Pinnacle Acquisitions. The board's vote had been unanimous. After all, he had saved the company from complete destruction. Robert Lancaster's federal indictment made for interesting reading. Securities fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy. But it was Isabella's charges that drew Marshall's attention. Her charity foundation schemes had been more extensive than anyone suspected. Mr. Huffman, his new assistant, announced, "The FBI has more questions about Mrs. Huffman's activities at the children's schools." "Send them everything," Marshall replied. Every donation, every transaction. The evidence was damning. Isabella had been running parallel embezzlement schemes through various school charity foundations, using her position on their boards to siphon millions. In the federal detention center, Robert Lancaster was learning the cost of betrayal. His fellow inmates didn't take kindly to someone who had planned to leave thousands jobless. Isabella's arrest made headlines. Charity Queen's empire of fraud exposed. Her social circle evaporated overnight. The same people who had attended her lavish fundraisers now pretended they'd never known her. Alexandra faced her own reckoning at Harvard. The Academic Review Board had some uncomfortable questions about her admission and subsequent performance. The twins watched their Yale careers crumble as evidence of Robert's illegal donations emerged. Their trust funds, frozen by federal investigators, revealed a web of fraudulent transfers. Victoria and Andrew struggled with a different kind of loss. Their entire family narrative had been a lie. Marshall implemented sweeping changes at Pinnacle. New anti-fraud measures, transparent accounting practices, ethical oversight committees. The company's stock price responded positively to each reform. 1 year later, Marshall stood at a podium, accepting the Corporate Ethics Leadership Award. Pinnacle's value had tripled under his leadership. The company had become a model of corporate transparency. Integrity, he told the audience, is not negotiable. His eyes swept over the crowd, noting the absent faces of his former family. Alexandra was fighting to keep her Harvard degree. The twins had been expelled from Yale. Victoria and Andrew were learning harsh lessons about trust and betrayal. Robert watched the ceremony on prison TV, his 30-year sentence stretching before him. Through his cell window, he could see the sign of his former car dealership, now Marshall's Corporate Ethics Foundation headquarters. Isabella, awaiting her own trial, discovered the final irony of her betrayal. The prenuptial agreement she had insisted on, meant to protect her assets, now prevented her from claiming any of Marshall's legitimate wealth. "Your Honor," her lawyer argued in court, "Mrs. Huffman's charitable work? You mean her systematic embezzlement from school foundations?" The judge wasn't impressed. Marshall's foundation became a leader in exposing family-based corporate conspiracies. Its first case study, the bonus plan, became required reading at business schools. The story of how one family's greed nearly destroyed an empire, and how integrity ultimately triumphed, served as a warning to corporate America. Marshall's name became synonymous with ethical leadership, while Robert and Isabella became cautionary tales. In his CEO's office, Marshall reviewed the final numbers. Pinnacle had emerged stronger, more transparent, more valuable. His revenge hadn't just been complete, it had been profitable. "Mr. Huffman," his assistant called. "The prison warden is on line 1. Mr. Lancaster is requesting a meeting." Marshall's response was simple. No comment. He turned back to his work, the Manhattan skyline stretching behind him. They had taught him about family, loyalty, and betrayal. He had taught them about consequences. The Corporate Ethics Leadership Award sat on his desk, its inscription catching the light. To those who choose integrity over family loyalty when the two conflict, Marshall had made his choice. The empty chairs at his family table spoke louder than any revenge could have. Epilogue: The Final Ledger. 5 years later, Marshall Huffman stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office in the newly renamed Huffman Tower, formerly Pinnacle headquarters. At 53, his success had only amplified his commanding presence. The Wall Street Journal on his desk carried the headline, "Huffman Ethics Foundation Expands Global Reach. Corporate Watchdog Sets New Standards." His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Huffman, the prison warden is on line 3. Put him through." Marshall's voice remained as measured as ever. "Mr. Huffman, Robert Lancaster is requesting another meeting. He claims to have information about additional offshore accounts. Tell him what you've told him the last dozen times. All communications go through the Foundation's legal team." The warden cleared his throat. "He's not doing well, sir." The appeal denial hit him hard. "Neither are the thousands whose pensions he tried to steal," Marshall replied. "Anything else?" "No, sir." "Thank you for your time." Marshall pulled up the Foundation's latest report on his tablet. Robert Lancaster's fall had become their most comprehensive case study. 5 years into his 30-year sentence, the former CEO had aged decades. His attempts to bargain his way to a reduced sentence had failed consistently, each appeal revealing new layers of his fraud. The maximum security wing of federal prison was a far cry from his former penthouse. The only view from his cell was the gleaming headquarters of the Huffman Ethics Foundation, formerly his prized luxury car dealership. The Foundation's illuminated sign served as a nightly reminder of his downfall. Sarah, Marshall's longtime assistant and now the Foundation's COO, entered with a stack of reports. "The latest from the Isabella Lancaster case, sir." Marshall noted the name change. Isabella had reverted to Lancaster after the divorce, a final act of desperation that backfired spectacularly. The prenuptial agreement she'd insisted on had worked exactly as intended, just not in her favor. "How's she enjoying house arrest?" Marshall asked, though he already knew the answer. "The ankle monitor doesn't match her designer wardrobe," Sarah replied with a slight smile. The latest appeal was denied. Her legal team tried to argue that the Charity Foundation embezzlement was Robert's idea, and the evidence showed otherwise. "Your documentation was flawless, as usual." The judge particularly enjoyed the recordings of her bragging about fooling the school boards. Isabella's fall from grace had been absolute. After serving 3 years in federal prison for fraud, the twins, Thomas and Timothy, had faced their own reckonings. Yale's expulsion had led to a series of increasingly desperate attempts to trade on their former connections. Their trust funds, revealed to be built entirely on fraudulent transfers, had been seized and redistributed to Pinnacle's Victim Compensation Fund. "Thomas tried to contact the Foundation again," Sarah continued. "He's offering to speak at our corporate ethics seminars. Timothy is still trying to day trade with what's left of their allowance." Victoria had chosen a different path. After the truth emerged about her family's crimes, she'd legally changed her name and enrolled in a public high school. Now in her second year of community college, she was the only one who'd made a clean break from her parents' influence. Andrew, the youngest at 20, was studying engineering at a state university under a merit scholarship, the only one of Marshall's children to earn his place legitimately. He occasionally sent progress reports through the Foundation's legal team, maintaining professional but distant contact. "The latest numbers from Pinnacle?" Marshall asked, turning to the business empire he'd rebuilt from the ashes of Betrayal. Sarah projected the quarterly report onto the wall screen. Under Marshall's leadership, Pinnacle had become a model of corporate transparency and ethical governance. The stock price had quadrupled, the workforce had grown by 30%, and the company's ethical business practices had set new industry standards. "The SEC is using our compliance framework as a template," Sarah noted. 3 other Fortune 500 companies have adopted our transparency protocols." Marshall nodded, turning to another matter. "The Lancaster family's last attempt to access the offshore accounts? Failed spectacularly. Your early warning to the Swiss authorities proved invaluable. Robert's hidden transfers to his personal accounts were tracked and seized. Isabella's attempts to claim ignorance of the accounts backfired when our documentation showed her signature on the original paperwork. The Foundation's legal team had systematically dismantled every attempt by Robert or Isabella to salvage any part of their stolen fortune. Each appeal, each legal challenge, each desperate plea had only served to strengthen the case against them. Marshall's phone buzzed with a news alert. Lancaster charity fraud. New evidence reveals deeper conspiracy. The article detailed how Isabella's embezzlement from school foundations had begun even before her marriage to Marshall, a fact she'd hidden from everyone, including Robert. Your speech for next week's Ethics and Leadership Conference? Sarah inquired. Done. No mentions of names, as usual. The facts speak for themselves. The Foundation had grown beyond even Marshall's initial vision. What started as a watchdog organization had evolved into a global authority on corporate ethics and family-based fraud prevention. Their case studies were taught at business schools worldwide, with the bonus plan remaining their most compelling example. A notification popped up on Marshall's screen, a message from Agent Phillips, now the FBI's Deputy Director of Financial Crimes. Thought you'd want to know. Robert tried to broker another deal. Claims he can expose Isabella's earliest frauds in exchange for a transfer to minimum security. We declined. Marshall's reply was brief. As expected, the Foundation's investigation had already uncovered those frauds, along with evidence that Robert had known about them from the beginning. Their mutual betrayal had been documented in exquisite detail, each partner planning to abandon the other once the trans-global merger was complete. Sarah cleared her throat. One more thing, sir. The Princeton Ethics Department wants to do a longitudinal study on the case. They're particularly interested in the children's rehabilitation outcomes. Forward them the public records. Nothing more. Marshall's position on his former family remained consistent, professional distance maintained through legal channels. He neither helped nor hindered their attempts to rebuild their lives, letting the consequences of their choices play out naturally. The sun was setting over Manhattan as Marshall reviewed the Foundation's latest initiative, a global database tracking family-based corporate fraud patterns. The system would help identify warning signs and prevent future schemes, using the Lancaster case as its baseline. Will you be attending Robert's next parole hearing? Sarah asked, though she knew the answer. No need. The documentation speaks for itself. Robert's previous hearings had become increasingly desperate performances. His attempts to portray himself as a victim of circumstances had crumbled under the weight of evidence. The parole board had access to every document, every recording, every betrayal. Isabella's latest court-mandated psychiatric evaluation had revealed what Marshall had known all along. Her remorse was as fraudulent as her charity work. She'd spent her prison time networking with white-collar criminals, already planning her next schemes. The Foundation's annual report is ready for review, Sarah noted. The section on preventing inherited positions of trust is particularly relevant. The report detailed how family connections had been used to disguise financial fraud, using the Lancaster case as its primary example. Alexandra's grooming for Marshall's position, the twins' fraudulent Yale admissions, Victoria and Andrew's planned roles, all had been documented and analyzed. Marshall's phone buzzed again, a message from his corporate ethics professor at Harvard Business School. Your case study has transformed our curriculum. Would you consider giving this year's commencement address? He typed a brief acceptance. The irony wasn't lost on him. The institution that had unknowingly hosted part of Robert and Isabella's scheme would now hear from the man who exposed it. As night fell over Manhattan, Marshall stood at his office windows one last time. The city stretched before him, its lights reflecting off the Huffman Tower's glass facade. In a cell hundreds of miles away, Robert Lancaster would be watching the Foundation sign illuminate the darkness. In her modest apartment, Isabella would be planning another doomed appeal. Their children, scattered across the country, would be facing their own daily reminders of choices and consequences. Alexandra in her entry-level position, the twins in their failed trading ventures, Victoria in her community college classes, Andrew in his engineering studies. Sarah appeared at his door. Car's ready, sir. The Foundation's board meeting starts in 30 minutes. Marshall gathered his papers. The Foundation's latest initiative would help other companies identify and prevent family-based fraud schemes. The Lancaster case would continue teaching its lessons, long after its principals had faced their final judgments. One last thing, Sarah added. Isabella's publisher reached out again about the book deal. Same answer as always, Marshall replied. Let the evidence tell the story. He stepped into the elevator, descending toward the Foundation's headquarters. The former luxury car dealership had been transformed into a center for corporate ethics research, its mission statement carved in marble. Integrity above all. In the end, Robert and Isabella had taught him valuable lessons about family, loyalty, and betrayal. Through the Foundation, he would ensure those lessons benefited generations of corporate leaders to come. Their story had become a cautionary tale, their names synonymous with fraud and betrayal. But the true legacy of the Lancaster affair wasn't in their downfall, it was in the systems and safeguards their scheme had inspired. Marshall's revenge hadn't just been complete, it had been transformative. The empire they tried to steal had become a fortress of corporate integrity, their betrayal fueling a global movement for ethical business practices. As his car pulled away from the tower, Marshall allowed himself a small smile. They had taught him about the price of trust. He had taught the world about the value of truth. The final ledger was balanced. The books were closed. The bonus plan had paid its last dividend.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.